Welcome to Anime T23, where we dive deep into the most intriguing what-if scenarios in the anime universe. In today's episode, we explore a world where Naruto Uzumaki, the future hero of Konoha, to protect his brother. Join us as we uncover how Naruto's become Shinobi. To protect his brother transforms into his greatest strength. What if Naruto parents died, and Naruto becomes Shinobi to protect his brother? Part 3. Chapter 11. I would have gotten away with it if it weren't for you. Meddling kids. Over the next few months, Team 7 completed 5 more C ranks, although they managed to avoid any altercations like they had encountered in their first mission. The 3 trained harder than ever with future battles in mind, and their abilities gradually improved, although not as fast as they wanted. It was as Naruto was walking home from his errands that he overheard the rumors about Kumo. They'd been fighting with Kumogakure since before he'd become a Jinin, but it appeared it was all about to end. He burst in the apartment, startling Kazuya as he just barely caught the dropped bowl. "Would you stop doing that?" he whined. "Not all of us can sense people coming, you know?" Naruto shrugged, knowing he wasn't going to stop anytime soon. He ruffled Ryo's hair on his way past the kitchen table where the kid was doodling something Naruto couldn't recognize. It had a lot of orange, though, so he approved either way. He dumped his new Fuinjutsu books on the table and went to put away the groceries he'd been carrying in the other hand. "Have you heard? Apparently we're going to end the war with Kumo." "What?" Kazuya asked, surprised. "Seriously?" "Yup, there's going to be a peace treaty and everything." "Huh?" Kazuya huffed, finishing up and folding the tea towel. Ni-san! "Yeah?" Naruto smiled down at his brother, putting the bag of rice on the counter. "What did you draw today?" Ryo presented the orange mess, which now Naruto thought about it, looked very familiar. His hands started to shake as he reached out for the paper, staring the single red eye staring out from the page. "Where did you see this?" he whispered, distant cries and rumbling echoing in his ears. Kazuya took one look at his face and peered over his shoulder. The color left his friend's face as he jerked back from the picture. "What the fuck?" "In a dream," Ryo chirped happily, missing their reaction as he proceeded to ramble about the colors. "Ryo?" The young boy's mouth snapped shut as the notion that something was right entered his thoughts. What did he do? Nissan never spoke to him like this. Naruto put the page to the side and dropped into a crouch, placing his hands on his brother's shoulders. "Ryo, you got to promise me that you'll never show this picture to anyone. You didn't do anything wrong, but people won't like it." He didn't want to scare him, but Ryo needed to understand this before someone else saw it. If people thought the Kyuubi was bleeding through his father's seal, Naruto didn't want to think how they'd react. It had been almost 5 years, but something like that night tends to stick in people's memories. He would know. Ryo stared at him, confused and hurt at the reaction. "Okay," he agreed quietly, head dropping to his chest. "Hey." Naruto reached a hand beneath Ryo's chin, lifting his head to look into sad violet eyes. "Why don't you draw a picture for Kakashi when he comes back? Like Pakken?" Ryo nodded, and a faint smile reappeared on his round face as he trotted back to the table. Naruto stood back up, but was quickly yanked off his feet and shoved into the nearest room, which happened to be Kazuya's. A purple futon was neatly folded in the corner, and the desk opposite was covered in medical books he'd borrowed from the library the day before. He brushed the hand off and looked into Kazuya's scared eyes. "Naruto, why the fuck is your brother drawing the Kyuubi? Because I know for a fact your brother's never seen it." Naruto stared at his friend before sighing heavily. He'd hoped to tell Kazuya after he'd told Ryo, but it appears that wasn't going to happen. He took a deep breath. "Ryo has the Kyuubi sealed inside him," he explained, watching Kazuya's face carefully. "The Yondaime couldn't kill it, so he sealed it into a baby. Ryo was born just hours before the attack, so he was a good fit." Kazuya's mouth opened and closed as he processed the information. Before he could open his mouth to speak, Naruto hurriedly continued. "The Kyuubi has no power, though. It's like sealing a kunai into a scroll. He's just keeping it there. The Yondaime seal is the best. It won't break." Kazuya considered him further. "I mean, I could have told you that the Kyuubi has no effect on him," Kazuya shrugged, although his shoulders were still tense. "He's the nicest kid I know." Naruto started to release his breath, but it caught as Kazuya frowned further. I love the kid, but the Kyuubi took my mom from me. It's just gonna take some time to process, you know? Naruto's heart sunk, but he nodded. His friend deserved a chance to make his own decision, even if it was one he didn't like. It was a rough week after that incident, with Kazuya finding every excuse to leave the apartment. As his friend walked through the doorway, hours after training that day had finished, Naruto prepared for the worst. Ryo spotted the older boy and bounced over, peering up at his face. Kazuya paused for a moment before scooping the kid up, hugging him close. Naruto met his eyes from across the room and sagged into the counter behind him at the acceptance in his gaze. They'd be fine. The village was abuzz with gossip about the Kumo peace delegate as Kazuya and his team walked up to the Hokage's tower to report another successful D-rank mission. As he and Naruto walked to Tenjiro's shop to pick up deliveries after handing in the report, the pair happened to pass by the Hyuga compound. Things had gotten back to the way they used to be between them since the picture incident. He still saw Ryo as the same happy kid as before, but he had to take the time for it all to sink in. That had been the worst night of his life, and the image of the giant orange fox destroying his home still cropped up in his nightmares. It was hard to imagine that beast of destruction seal inside little Ryo, but the contrast between the two had helped him accept the truth. He knew there was more that Naruto was hiding, but he had promised to tell him after Ryo, which he thought was fair. He trusted the redhead to tell him when he was ready. He had never told the blonde everything that happened at his uncle's, and Kazuya knew he never would if he could help it. Naruto's head snapped towards the Hyuga compound, and Kazuya could recognize that look anywhere. What are you sensing? Sometimes his friend's chakra-sensing ability awed and baffled him at the same time. It was hard to imagine knowing where everyone was around you without looking. It seemed like a lot. It made it impossible to surprise his friend, as he could feel Kazuya approaching ages away. This was great for missions, but not for when he couldn't enact revenge on the younger boy for sneaking up on him. Sometimes Kazuya liked to compare it to Naruto seeing ghosts, especially at moments like this when he appeared to be staring at the empty air. Someone I haven't felt before. They're not a Hyuga either. Kazuya looked in the direction Naruto was staring, but didn't see anything. He shrugged and began to drag his friend forward, towards whoever he had sensed. One way to find out to whom the signature belonged to. As the two boys crept closer to the walls of the compound, Kazuya finally spotted a man examining the wall in the distance. He dragged his friend back out of view as the man's head snapped towards them. He held his breath as he looked at his friend. Blue eyes glazed over as they looked at something only he could see. Kazuya poked his head back round the corner to look at the man. Why was he hanging around the compound? After the man eventually left, Kazuya leaned his head on the wall behind him. He wasn't sure what to make of that. Hey, get off the wall! One of the Hyuga guards came into view, and Kazuya dragged his friend away, yelling an apology in response. After walking for a bit, Naruto was still silent, and Kazuya had to nudge him. What going on in that head of yours, Akachan? Naruto's eyes darted to him and he appeared to turn something over in his head. I think we should come back tonight. What? Why? Kazuya frowned. If you think something's going to happen, why not just tell the Hyuga? Have you met a Hyuga? They'll never listen to us, pointed out Naruto, one red eyebrow raised. Fair. They continued on, and Kazuya made a mental note to ask Tsume if Kiba was up for a sleepover. The night was cool as they snuck towards the Hyuga compound that night, Ryo safely tucked into a bed at the Imazukas. They had dressed in their mission gear, black shirts and trousers, and they blended into the night. Naruto was grateful to his best friend for going along with him on this. He couldn't give any details, it more gut instinct than anything, but the man from earlier hadn't been from Konoha. Kazuya had pointed out loads of people visited Konoha, but Naruto had a bad feeling about this one. He'd never seen any other visitors lurking around the clan compounds, especially with that kind of chakra. The only way Naruto could describe it was, he got a metallic taste in mouth. Not much to go on, but if it turns out to be nothing, then all they've lost is a night's sleep. As they came to the same corner, the same chakra signature popped up, but it was inside the compound. Startled, Naruto ran forward, Kazuya echoing his steps. The signature leapt over the wall, and the man rose to his feet just a few meters away. Naruto's heart dropped in horror as his gaze switched from the Kumo headband to the sack the man carried. There was a weak signature smaller than even Ryo's. "Kazuya, you gotta go get the Hyuga. Kumo, he's got a kid in there," Naruto yelled behind him as he threw a kunai at the man's leg. He heard Kazuya swear loudly before darting around the corner. The kunai missed, but the man's surprise allowed Naruto to get close enough to aim a kick at his legs. The man jumped, but Naruto had managed to take another kunai out of his pouch, slashing at the hand that held the sack. It reached the edge of his wrist, enough for him to drop the bag, and a small squeak reached him. "Kid, you picked the wrong time to fight me," the man growled as he aimed a kick at Naruto's stomach. He dodged but failed to see the other leg as the man spun. Spittle flew from his mouth as Naruto hit the ground hard, swallowing the bile forced up from the hit. The man reached down to grab the sack again, but Naruto ran through the seal for Kawarimi, landing a punch on the man's face as he swapped with the sack. Fury sparked in the man's gray eyes, and Naruto barely rolled in time to avoid the kunai that would have stabbed his heart. His world spun as the man kicked his head, and he curled up as the Kuno Nin landed another kick on his stomach. "You've got to die, kid," he growled, grabbing Naruto's left arm and twisting it. Naruto yelped as the bone gave way and caught the man's nose as he kicked desperately. He crawled towards the sack, wincing as he jostled his wounds. "Naruto!" He couldn't pick his head up to spot his friend as the foreign shinobi swore, and he heard the ting of kunai brushing each other. As he stared at the ground, he felt a brush of air pass him, and the Kuno Nin's chakra abruptly disappear. He rolled onto his back, squinting his eyes to see the broad back of a Hyuga standing over the body of the Kumo Nin, his head at an awkward angle. A wave of pain hit him as he tried to sit up. Kazuya's worried face appeared above him, and Naruto let the darkness take him, knowing he'd be safe with his best friend. Naruto rose to consciousness slowly, the light blinding him the first time he tried opening his eyes. At the soft Naruto, he tried again and opened his eyes to a familiar white ceiling. The thought of "please don't let it have been 3 weeks" passed through his mind until the events of before slammed in his brain. He shot up, regretting the movement instantly as the room spun. He felt a gentle hand push him back down and followed it to Kazuya's tired face. "The kid?" was the first thing out of his mouth. Kazuya stared at him for a moment before laughter burst out of him. Naruto watched his friend with concern. "Did he get hit in the head too?" "She's fine," Kazuya reassured him. "Trust you to focus on the kid and not on the fact that guy could have killed you." Naruto's face scrunched up in confusion as his friend chuckled. The girl was Hyuga Hinata, the daughter of the clan head. Kumo was after the Byakugan, and so the guy who was here for the peace treaty tried to kidnap her for the bloodline. Hyuga-sama killed him, and she's back with her clan. "You've only been asleep for a few hours." Naruto nodded and sat up again more slowly, glumly glancing at the cast of his left arm, just when he thought he was free of them. "Also, I'm pretty sure we're in trouble." "What?" "The Hokage and Hyuga-sama want to see us as soon as you can stand. They want to know why we were there and didn't tell anyone." Kazuya shrugged, unbothered. "Great," he groaned, swinging his feet out of bed. "Guess we better go see the old man." Hiruzen sat at his desk as Hiyashi tapped his foot beside him, arms folded and fury lining his features. This whole incident was an international nightmare. He had a furious clan head, a dead Kumo Nin, and an angry Kumo. And mixed up in this whole mess were 2 young genin who had no idea of the significance of their actions. The doors opened, and in walked the 2 headaches themselves. Naruto shot a look at the Hyuga head and bowed with Kazuya, their Hokage-sama, overlapping. As the 2 boys straightened up, Hiruzen took a moment to look over his successor's son. He'd grown in the time since he'd become a genin, at least 4 inches. Red hair hung down to his shoulder blades, as straight as his mother's, although it was obvious the boy had come straight from his hospital bed. He thought that the scar on Naruto's face had faded slightly, but it was hard to tell with how pale the boy was. The contrast was stark against the forming bruise on his cheek. Not a speck of orange could be found, and Hiruzen found a strange mix of sadness and pride at the observation. He had heard only good reports on his missions and training since he had graduated, with the exception of their first C-B rank mission. He also noted that the blue in the boy's eyes had darkened since he'd last seen him. It was closer to Minato's shade now. A few more years, he would be looking into eyes identical to the Yondaime Hokage's. "So boys," Hiruzen began, "do you want to explain your side of the story?" They exchanged a glance before the brunette stepped forward. "The day before, we were walking by the Hyuga compound and Naruto noticed a chakra signature that was out of place," he explained, his voice steady. "We went to go check it out, and we saw someone beside the walls. I didn't recognize his chakra signature," added Naruto. "He wasn't Hyuga, but we couldn't get close enough to see who he was. Something felt wrong, so I convinced Kazuya to come with me last night to check it out, maybe see if he had left anything behind." "You didn't think to tell anyone?" Hiashi interrupted, his tone sharp. "Tell them what?" Naruto didn't back down. "We saw a man in the distance doing nothing near the Hyuga compound." Hiruzen cut in before Hiashi could reply. "The rest?" The boys exchanged another look before Kazuya took over. "Naruto sensed the guy inside the compound and we ran closer. The guy then dropped in front of us and Naruto felt Hinata's chakra in the bag. I ran to get someone and found Hyuga-sama already beginning to look for her. I led him to Naruto." The boy finished with a glance at the redhead. "After I figured out there was a kid in the bag, I just tried to stall until Kazuya could bring help." Naruto shrugged, absently rubbing the cast. Hiruzen sat back in his chair, contemplating their words. Their presence seemed to be a combination of Naruto's sensing abilities and dumb luck. He wasn't really sure where to go with this. "You keep mentioning Naruto's sensing the man, and Hinata?" Hiashi narrowed his pale eyes at the boys. "Naruto is a gifted sensor," Hiruzen supplied. "He was born with the ability. You didn't think to tell anyone?" Genma piped up, the senbon clenched in his teeth. The boys exchanged guilty looks, turning to look at their sensei. "We're sorry, sensei. We didn't exactly have much to go on." Genma met each of the boys' eyes separately before sighing, rolling his senbon from one side of his mouth to other. "We should thank you, boys," Hiruzen interjected. "You interrupted a kidnapping attempt and saved a little girl, but I feel that you do not know the extent of the situation." "Would you mean Hokage-sama?" Naruto caught himself just in time with a glance at Hiashi. "Kumo are denying any accusations of kidnapping and are demanding compensation for the death of their peace ambassador. They want the head of the man who killed him." At Hiruzen's words, the boys lost their composure. "But we saw him. We literally caught him with Hinata in his bag." "You are Jinin," Hiashi broke in. "Your word means nothing to Kumo." Outrage clouded their expressions and Hiruzen picked up on the frustration from the redhead. Maybe if the world knew his lineage, they would listen, but it was not worth the risk to Naruto or Ryo. Both the grandfather and the Hokage in him agreed that these boys needed to be protected. Naruto's sensing abilities were far too valuable. "So what? We just got summoned to tell us thanks but you fucked up?" Kazuya frowned. "I summoned you here to get the full story and to swear you both to silence over this matter," Hiruzen scolded. "No one can know you were involved, lest Kumo demand your heads as well." Silence followed his words. Hiashi stepped forward, gaining the attention of the boys again. The clan head seemed to gather himself and release the tension in his frame, if only for a moment. "Thank you for saving my daughter," he confided. "No matter if you didn't tell anyone of your doubts or what comes next, you stopped them from taking my daughter. This will never be forgotten." The surprise Hiruzen felt must have mirrored the Genin's as their jaws dropped in shock. "And know that if you ever have concerns involving the Hyuga, that I will listen." Naruto appeared to consider Hiashi's words before coming to a decision unknown to Hiruzen. "That's all, boys," he dismissed. "Consider your involvement an S-ranked secret." Kazuya's eyes widened, but Naruto just rolled his eyes. It made sense. The redhead's life was an S-ranked secret. "Congrats on the grandkid, Gigi." Hiruzen nodded, smiling briefly in thanks. They left shortly after, their sensei following closely behind. At least Hiruzen knew that the boys would be fine. After what was becoming known as the Hyuga affair in the village, Naruto didn't hear much about the political maneuvering that was sure to have followed. He was still digesting the chewing out from Genma-sensei that occurred the moment they left Jiji's office. In the months they'd spent training and carrying out missions with the Tokubetsu Junin, he'd been chill, casual even. Genma-sensei spent their more torturous training sessions cracking jokes at their expense. If Naruto hadn't been so miserable at the time, he might have laughed. Overall, he was calm, with a sense of humor. That man disappeared when he rounded on them in the tower that day. The guilt from that day followed Naruto even now as he guided Ryo through the village. It's not that they didn't trust their sensei, because he did. He really did. Naruto was just used to doing things either himself or with Kazuya. Seeking help from adults was never his first thought. He also hadn't thought that the bad feeling he'd had would have spiraled into an international incident. Naruto-kun? He was pulled from his thoughts at the shout, turning to see green spandex quickly moving towards him. "Hi, guy," he smiled, leaning slightly away as the Junin stopped in front of the pair, pouncing into his nice guy pose. "How are you on this most youthful day?" Naruto felt a tug on his hand and looked down to see Ryo staring at Guy, although he couldn't pinpoint if it was admiration or shock. "Sunshine, this is Maito Guy. He's friends with Kakashi. Guy, this is my brother Ryo." Guy's smile switched from him to Ryo as he came out of the nice guy pose. "You look like you are fully embracing the springtime of your youth, young Ryo." Naruto scrunched his brow in confusion before clocking what the Junin meant. Ryo's t-shirt was the same shade of green as the spandex suit Guy wore. Right then and there, Naruto swore to never leave Ryo with Guy alone. Last thing he needed was Kazuya's meltdown if Ryo came home dressed in the jumpsuit that he still complained about to this day. "Oh, Guy?" Naruto remembered. "I owe you a bowl of ramen." "From when, young Jinin?" "From my first C rank. The training menu you gave me pretty much saved me," he elaborated, realizing that he hadn't actually told Guy yet. "Ramen?" Naruto grinned as he looked back to his brother. A magic word for his brother, guaranteed to gain Ryo's attention. Even when faced with the youthful sight of Guy, he wasn't any different. Ramen was the food of the gods after all. He led his brother and Guy to the stand, Ryo shooting question after question at the Junin. "If it isn't the Uzumakis," Tochi called from behind the counter. "Where's the third one?" "Kazuya's annoying the medic nuns at the hospital today," Naruto explained, helping Ryo onto a stool. "There was a bit in his books last night that he didn't get, so he's trying to convince one of them to explain it." "That sounds like him," Tochi chuckled. Naruto opened his mouth to reply when he heard another Naruto from behind. He turned in his seat to see Kakashi and another man walk up to the ramen stand. Ryo screamed next to him, launching himself from the stool and into Kakashi's arms. The Junin hefted Ryo to sit in the crook of his arm, eye smiling. "Hey Ryo?" The Junin hummed. "Been looking after your brother for me?" "Yep." Kakashi moved further in and Naruto dodged the hand that came to ruffle his braid. "Here for ramen?" Kakashi placed Ryo back on the stool, taking a seat beside him. The man who was with him took the seat on the other side of Kakashi, his plain face blank. He had a weird head protector that framed his face and wore the traditional Junin gear. Naruto was pretty sure that he'd never seen him before, but there was something in his chakra, something different that he couldn't quite make sense of. "This is Tenzo," Kakashi nodded his head to the man. "I worked with him some recent missions." Naruto caught the brief frown that crossed Tenzo's face. "Tenzo, these are the kids I told you about, although there's one missing. Where's Kei?" Kakashi was abruptly cut off by Guy. "My eternal rival." "Oh Guy, I didn't see you there. Did you say something?" "You're so hip, Kakashi," cried out Guy, tears streaming down his face. Naruto looked between them before shaking his head, turning away. They had a weird friendship. He quickly ordered a couple of miso ramen with Tochi, failing to keep Ryo in his seat as the Junin spiraled into one of their challenges. Ryo in between them demanding to take part, he'd asked what Guy wanted after they were done. "So Tenzo," he began, turning to the quiet team. "How did you say you knew Kakashi?" The brunette stared back at him, face still blank. "I worked with Kakashi-senpai on recent missions. Naruto's eyebrows drew together in thought. That was exactly what Kakashi had said. Was it classified? He hadn't sensed Tenzo's weird chakra before, so he was sure he wasn't in the general shinobi forces. He knew Kakashi was an Anbu, although he wasn't supposed to. So did that mean this guy was also an Anbu? Are you Anbu? He blurted out, despite knowing the team couldn't tell him. Maybe Kazuya was on to something when he said Naruto couldn't keep his mouth shut to save his life. No. Right. I'm sorry, that was my bad. Naruto chuckled, sheepishly scratching the back of his neck. I was just curious about your chakra since I haven't felt it before. You can feel my chakra? Tenzo asked, finally moving his face as his eyebrow twitched. Yeah, Naruto answered cheerfully, missing Tenzo's unease. There's something different about it, but I can't tell what it is. Kakashi suddenly appeared next to him, blocking his view of Tenzo. Naruto turned to see Guy and Ryo still engrossed in a game of Jankenpo. Naruto, I know you have these sensing abilities, but sometime you have to respect people's privacy, okay? Naruto frowned. What do you mean? I mean, Kakashi sighed and took a seat. I know you are used to feeling everyone's chakra, and it's natural for you, but you have to remember that some people might not appreciate you asking questions about stuff that might be private. Kakashi's words swirled in Naruto's head. He hadn't considered that before. He had been able to feel chakra for so long now that he didn't think twice about it anymore. He had a habit of forgetting that no one else was used to it, except Ryo and his team. As far as he knew, he was the only born sensor in Konoha, but he never really stopped to consider what that meant. He looked up to see Kakashi's eyes smile and nodded. They were obviously hiding something, but Naruto decided to let it go for now. Kakashi maybe had a point. He didn't need to know, and he knew he would be uneasy if someone knew about the secrets he hid just by looking at him. He put these thoughts to one side as Itachi placed a steaming bowl in front of him, Ryo and Guy appearing at his side at the smell. Naruto dug in as the buzz of chatter at the stand washed over him. He would think about it more later. Chapter 12. What are you doing? My best Ryo's knee bounced up and down as he waited for his brothers to walk through the front door. They'd been out to Kawa no Kuni for a C rank and were due back today. Ryo was ready for them. At the Inuzukas today, Kiba had started shinobi training, and when Ryo had asked Sumebachan about it, she had said that all Inuzukas started training when they turned 6. She also said to ask Nisan about training since they would be joining the academy in 2 years, and that Nisan and Kazumi would know best since they graduated early. Ryo knew that his brothers were amazing shinobi. He'd watched them train for as long as he could remember. When he'd asked Kashi about it, the teen was more than happy to tell him all about his brother's exploits. 2 bits of information had stuck with Ryo since that conversation. Firstly, that when Nisan had been 6, he was already in the academy, and secondly, when Nisan was at the actual academy entrance age of 8, he'd already been a genin for a year. Ryo was 6. He wasn't great at maths. He did know, though, that he should be at the academy like Nisan was at his age. He also knew that he should be training to join the academy like Kiba was. If Nisan and Kazumi weren't going to bring it up, then Ryo was going to have to remind them himself. His eyes snapped towards the door as it opened, and his brothers stumbled in. Kazumi dumped his backpack by the door with his dirty sandals and flopped backwards onto one of the sofas, his short brown hair flopping over his eyes. Ryo didn't see either of them without their favorite colors very often, so to see Kazumi in a black turtleneck was still strange to him. Nisan followed behind, shutting the door behind him and shoving stray strands of long red hair behind his ear as they escaped his high ponytail. He wore a black t-shirt with his brace covering his left arm. Both looked tired and dirty as Nisan also dumped his bag and sandals by the door. "Hi, sunshine," smiled Nisan, coming over to ruffle Ryo's short blonde hair before slumping into a seat across from him. "Hi, Nisan," he greeted, silently working up to what he wanted to say. "Hey, Ryo," Kazumi half-heartedly piped up. "Remind me to put nettles in Genma-sensei's spare clothes on the next mission," Nisan suddenly asked, raising his head to look at the back of the sofa. "Only if I get to help." "Hana would probably help distract him," Ni continued. "If he gets mad, then we can call it stealth training." Fuck stealth training, he'll know why we did it, Kazumi snapped, raising his head to peek one pink eye over the edge of the sofa. Ryo looked between the two. It was nice to have them home, but sometimes Ryo felt like the odd man out. He knew he was loved, but listening to them now, there was a lot about his family that he missed out on. That he missed because he couldn't go with them, or train with them, or would just get in the way. Nissan, Kazumi? Two pairs of eyes turned to look at him, both older boys now sitting up properly. I want to join the academy. Nissan's face dropped, and Kazumi shot a look at his brother before leaning back out of sight, muttering, "You're taking this one." No. Ryo steeled himself. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. Today they would see he was just as good as them, and that he didn't have to be left behind all the time. You were at the academy at my age. Yes, but that was different. Nissan shot back as he stood and went to pick up the bags. How? Demanded Ryo, jumping up from his seat. I could be just as good as you if you gave me a chance. I went to the academy early so we could leave the orphanage, Nissan replied, still calm as he picked up the two bags. There's no reason for you to go early. You did? It's not fair that you're treating me like I'm not good enough when you won't even give me a chance. Ryo yelled, his eyes burning. Nissan dropped the bags, the two thumps echoing around the apartment. He turned slowly and Ryo could finally see his exterior crack. It is not about how good you are, Nissan chastised. This is peacetime, which means no early admittance. When I went, we were still at war with Kumo. This has nothing to do with your ability. Ryo. He turned to look into soft pink eyes. You know we think you're the best kid ever. If it wasn't peacetime, would you let me go? Ryo snapped back, hating the silence that followed his question. Ryo. No. Ryo shook his head and took a few steps back. You always do this. What? You never tell me anything, and you never let me do anything. You just dump me with the Inuzuka so I don't get in your way. I'm not a baby anymore. The tears were flowing now. You always leave me out. I can do stuff too, but you don't think that I can. You don't tell me anything. I know the way the village looks at me. I know other kids avoid me and make fun of me. I know you talk about me behind my back, but nobody ever tells me why. Ryo, we're just trying to look out for you. He had never seen his Nissan look so hurt. Stop it. Why don't you believe in me? Ryo couldn't even see the other boys anymore, the tears blurring their faces. Why don't you trust me? His throat hurt from the screaming. Unable to stay in the same room anymore, Ryo ran to his room, slamming the door behind him. He didn't listen to see if they were moving in the other room. He pulled his spare sandals on and opened the window, fleeing. He didn't know if he was running from his family or himself. Naruto sniffled as a third hour passed without Ryo coming home. He'd wanted to fling himself out the window after his little brother, but Kazuya had talked him down. He had to let Ryo calm down. He knew Kazuya was right, but the sick feeling in his stomach only got worse the more time passed. How hadn't he seen it? How didn't he know what his own little brother was thinking? How had he made him feel like this? What had he done? He had only ever wanted the best for Ryo. He wanted Ryo to have the childhood he couldn't have, and that meant going to the academy with kids his age, with Kiba. He hadn't been perfect, he knew that. They'd been going on only C ranks for the past 3 months, so they hadn't exactly been around, but Ryo had always seemed happy enough with the Inuzuka. He'd even started staying in the apartment on his own at night. It crushed him that Ryo thought they didn't believe in him, that he was being left behind. Ryo was the reason he had gotten this far, the reason he trained so hard, the reason he was even here. Naruto had no idea what he would have done if Ryo hadn't been there after their parents died. He looked up as Kazuya slid into the seat in front of him. They were still covered in dirt and sweat from their C rank, but Naruto couldn't bear missing Ryo coming home if he went for a shower. Kazuya appeared to feel the same way. Are you going to tell him? Naruto looked away from his best friend, wiping the tears away. Yeah, he mumbled. I was gonna wait until the academy, but he's ready now. Naruto, I know you want to protect him, Kazuya started, tracing the wood of the table with a fingertip. I do too, but the kid has a point. Naruto opened his mouth to say what he didn't know, but Kazuya continued. We've been overprotecting him. He spends most of his time with the Inuzuka, a shinobi clan, so we know he's aware of what this life entails. He's watched us train his whole life. Of course, he's not going to understand why he can't do the same. Naruto quietly nodded, sighing as he put his face in his hands. His head snapped to the door as Ryo's chakra slowly walked up the steps of the building. Kazuya was quick to grab his shoulder, forcing him back into his seat. He wasn't even aware he stood up. "Let him come to us," Kazuya whispered, sitting back in his seat. For all that Kazuya was the voice of reason, Naruto could see the same tension and guilt lining his shoulders. When Kazuya thought he wasn't looking, it crumpled his features and his pink eyes shone with unshed tears. Ryo's chakra made it to the door, and remained there for several minutes. When the door began to open, Naruto let out his breath that he hadn't realized he was holding. His little brother walked in with his head down, fingers twisted around each other. As his head rose and his teary violet eyes met his, Naruto flung himself out of his chair and wrapped his arms around Ryo tightly. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into messy blonde locks. "Nissan. Ryo cut himself off as he squeezed his arms tighter around Naruto. Naruto released one arm to hold Kazuya as the brunette joined them, face wet with tears of his own. It would be okay. They were together. They would be okay. It took a while before the three calmed down enough to speak. Naruto sat with a cup of tea in front of him, with Kazuya giving one to Ryo in front of him before sliding into the chair next to the younger boy. "Ryo," Naruto began with a wobbly smile. "I want you to listen to me before you say anything else, okay?" Ryo nodded, sniffling and wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "There are things I haven't told you. It was never to make you feel like I didn't trust you, but these are some big things, S-rank secrets that I needed to know you could keep. Even Kazuya doesn't know it all." Ryo looked to Kazuya to see him nod before turning wide eyes back to Naruto. "Stay here." Naruto stood and walked to his room, crouching to retrieve a box from beneath his desk. He knew he shouldn't have this. It was terrible practice to keep evidence around, but he could never bear to part with it. He brought the box back to the kitchen table and put it down, sliding back into his seat. Taking the lid off, he reached in and took out a photo frame and gently brushed off the dust. He handed it to Ryo and watched the confusion cloud his features. "This is the Yondaime Hokage," Ryo stated, staring down at the old photo. "This lady with him, she's got your hair." Naruto nodded as understanding dawned on Kazuya's face. "You're the blonde kid?" "Yes." Naruto reached out and pointed to himself. "This is me on my first birthday. Tu-chan and Ka-chan made a huge fuss. Tu-chan even dropped his Hokage duties for that one day." He smiled, sitting back in his seat. "The only time I think I saw them happier is when they found out they were going to have you, Ryo." His brother's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "I was so happy. I got to visit Tu-chan in his office. Ka-chan took me to Ichiraku's, and my godparents visited all the time. My life was going to get even better, too. I was going to be a big brother." "The Yondaime's my dad?" Ryo asked quietly, staring down at the photograph. "Our parents were Namikaze Minato and Uzumaki Kushina. Our full names are Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto and Norio." "So wait," Kazuya broke in. "When you said that your parents named you after the Yondaime's son." "I lied. It was the best excuse Gigi and I could come up with for why I have the name Naruto. I didn't want to lose that too." "But why? Why do you have to lie?" Naruto looked into Ryo's confused eyes. "Our father made many enemies, Sunshine," he explained sadly. "Iwa would have come for our heads if they knew we were alive. People saw me run towards the QB in the attack, and the bandages after covered up my face for the most part. It was too good a chance to pass up." "Why don't you look like the kid in the picture?" Kazuya frowned. "I've never seen you dye your hair. My blonde hair and whiskers were too recognizable even with the scarring. Ero Sennin used a seal that hides them. It runs on my chakra, so bar dyeing, it'll never stop." "But Ryo," Naruto leaned forward, "it's important that you never tell anyone, not even Kiba. Maybe in the future when you've graduated and make chunin, but until then it's safer to keep hidden." "I know the Yondaime died in the attack, but what about Mum?" Ryo asked desperately. "They both died that night," Naruto admitted. "That's something else I wanted to tell you." Ryo put the picture on the table, staring at Naruto intently. This was a lot of information, but he had to know. He deserved to know. That night, the Kyuubi didn't come to Konoha, he was released here. Seeing the confusion on Ryo's face, he continued. There are people that act as containers for beings like the Kyuubi. You've seen me seal kunai into scrolls for missions, right? Naruto watched Ryo nod. Same thing. The person is not the biju, just the container for them. The night of the attack, the seal was weakened and the Kyuubi broke out. That's why the attack happened. The container was our mother, since Uzumakis were found to be perfect containers. Naruto recited what he'd managed to wheedle out of Jiji. You can't kill a biju, so Tochan sealed the beast back up into another Uzumaki to save Konoha, since Kachan didn't survive it escaping. Horror dawned on Ryo's face, but Naruto knew he had to continue. You. That's why everyone hates me? 'Cause I have the Kyuubi inside me? Ryo blurted out, a hand rising to cover his mouth. Naruto nodded, gently taking Ryo's hand away from his mouth. You saved Konoha, Ryo. The people who don't like you don't understand what you're doing. Remember, when a scroll seals a kunai, it doesn't become a kunai, right? Ryo nodded, but Naruto could see that he hadn't heard him. This explains a lot. The brothers looked towards Kazuya. The other boy was smiling, but Naruto could see the confusion and pain lining his face. I mean, you know the Hokage, Jiraiya of the Sannin and the Copy Nin. It makes sense with who your parents are. Naruto sent a grateful look to Kazuya for trying, and looked to Ryo once again. I can't let you go to the academy right now. They don't allow early entrance in peacetime, but we are going to start training you and preparing you for when you can go, he promised, squeezing Ryo's hand gently. I know this is a lot, but you have to swear to keep this a secret. All of it. Ryo watched him for a moment, and Naruto couldn't read him at all. The younger boy then nodded and stood, clutching the photo frame. Can I think about it all? I promise I won't tell, but... Of course, Sunshine. Naruto smiled, receiving the hug from his brother before he went to his room. He felt Ryo's signature settle and released a deep breath. He wasn't going to leave again. His head snapped to Kazuya as the brunette coughed, the tiredness from the mission and this whole evening hitting him. Your life is insane. Yeah, Naruto rubbed his eyes. It's just one big S-ranked secret. You didn't tell him about the whole dying thing. No, I didn't, Naruto replied curtly, gathering the cups of cold tea and pouring them down the drain. I told him this because it affected him. It's his family and his body. This thing is mine. I'm not going to worry him over something that's going to happen in like 10 years. Kazuya threw up his hands in surrender. It's your choice. He lowered his hands and looked pensive for a moment. My mother's name was Ryua, and her favorite color was purple. My dad died on a mission when I was 1, so I don't remember him at all. Naruto stared at his friend in surprise and came over to sit in Ryo's seat. She loved to sing and worked at a bakery near our house. Our house always smelled of fresh bread. Kazuya looked down at his hands. When the Kyuubi attacked, we couldn't get out in time. She shoved me out of the house right before it collapsed. I didn't even have time to try to find her in the rubble. A Chunin scooped me up and carried me to safety. It took me 2 days to find her name in the list of the dead. Naruto remained silent for a moment. Why? Thanks, Kazuya smiled sadly. Thank you for trusting me with your family. Someone else should know about her, and I trust you with mine. Naruto pulled his best friend in for a tight hug. This was good. They all needed this. They'd be fine. Genma walked into the Junin standby station and melted into the red sofas with a groan. Raito raised an eyebrow at him, and Genma let out another groan for good measure. How are you, Genin? Kotetsu grinned at him from the sofa across from him. Last time you came in like that, they spiked your senbon with a laxative. Damn, Genma, a voice spoke up. What'd you do to them this time? Anko strode up to the group, Kurenai following close behind. Anko plonked herself beside Genma, while Kurenai sat more gently beside Kotetsu. Can they prank their Genin instructor? Izumo piped up, sitting on Kotetsu's other side and placing his steaming cup on his knee. With the hell Genma puts them through, I think they're an exception. Raito chuckled, elbowing Genma's face gently. Genma shot his friend a betrayed look, before hauling himself up to sit up straight. You may laugh, but these Genin are insane, he muttered. Their hobbies are training. You try normal training methods when you got 3 workaholics bugging you. Admit it. Kotetsu leaned forward, grinning widely. "They've grown on you the last 2 years." Genma stuck him tongue out around his senbon but couldn't refute him. When he was first faced with 3 tiny faces looking up at him, he could admit now that it had daunted him. S-rank mission. No problem. Being responsible for 3 kids under the age of 11, big problem. He'd tried his best to come up with training that would keep them safe. The dodge training had admittedly been fun, but he knew it was an important skill that wasn't really taught in the academy. There was a lot about being a shinobi that wasn't taught at the academy. So it was his job to fill in the gaps and make sure that they don't die on their first real mission. 2 years later, he was confident in his Genin's skill, but he still tried to think outside the box with training. The more they faced in training, the better prepared they would be in the field. Genma was mostly sure that his team understood this, but he supposed it didn't make it any easier. He considered their retaliation for the hard training a training exercise for them all, stealth for them, and awareness for him. It was good that they could think for themselves. He would admit, though, there was nothing funnier than his Genin stomping towards him, yelling about whatever he had unleashed on them that day. He was only human after all. "You got the early grads, right?" Kurenai asked quietly. "Yup," Raito answered for him. "Oldest turned 12 this year." Anko whistled. "Damn, I heard about them. Weren't they the ones in the Forest of Death a couple months ago?" "Yup," Genma grinned. "They asked to stay closer to the village for the next while, so Naruto can train his brother for the academy, so we're mainly carrying out border patrols and guarding the village walls. I wanted to make sure they weren't going soft." "Didn't you drug them and put them there while they were sleeping?" Izumo frowned. "I left a note." Genma replied defensively. "That said, you're in the Forest of Death. Your training is to get out, don't die." "How do you even know that, Kotetsu?" "I found the note and showed everyone." Anko cackled. "They're Genin!" Kurenai exclaimed. "You can't do that." "They've been Genin for a couple years now," Genma shrugged, unapologetic. "I knew they could handle it, and they did. They even managed to dye all my bandanas pink by the next day." "Fuck, I can't believe I forgot about that." Anko howled next to him, the Chunin joining in. "This is how his team bonds." Raito patted Kurenai's arm sympathetically. "Literally everything I've thrown at them since I became their Junin instructor, they've done it brilliantly and chucked something back at me," Genma continued. "I'd bet my next mission pay they're the best Genin team in Konoha." "Look out. Proud Papa has emerged." Genma shoved Anko over. "Seriously though, I've seen one of them in the hospital learning medical jutsu," Kotetsu said slowly. "I've seen the redhead too, but he was setting fire to a tree after messing up a seal. What's the story with that?" "That's their own thing." Genma threw his hands up. "I'm not much help for them, but Naruto wanted to learn Fuinjutsu and Kazuya medical jutsu. I pointed them in the right direction, but that's all them." "What about the Inuzuka?" "Hana's too busy learning her clan jutsu to pick up something else," Genma answered Izumo. "So let me get this straight. You torture your Genin with batshit training ideas, and they decided that they wanted to learn more?" Anko drawled. "They are insane. They train with Guy too sometimes." Voluntarily, a shudder passed through the group at the thought of the odd Junin's workout routine. "Are all Genin teams like this?" "I think this one is special, Kurenai," smiled Raito. "So special that we never see you at the bars anymore. The men and women of Konoha are suffering in your absence." "Ooh ha ha." Genma leveled a quick glare at the purple-haired Junin. "Everyone misses your drunken ass," she continued. "I don't get drunk. I get awesome." "You awesomely fell off the table at the last Chunin exams trying to impress that Suna Chunin. You don't find quality entertainment like that everywhere." "Shut up, Anko." Kotetsu chuckled across from him and snagged Izumo's drink, taking a sip before offering it back to Izumo. "I'm not drinking out of that." Izumo's face twisted in disgust. "Who knows where your mouth has been?" Genma smiled at his friend's antics. It was true that he didn't spend as much time with them. Time was that he would have been out every week, a different companion every time. He still owed Anko a drinking contest after the last one had been hijacked by Guy and his challenges. He still had that in him, but his focus was his team. Even after they became Chunin and went off to do their own thing, he knew that they'd always be his team. He'd always be there for them. It would be fun though when they could join him at the bars. I'm going to enter them into the Chunin exams. His friends stopped talking to look at him. Not this year though. I would have, but it's in Iwa, he expanded. Next year, since it's in Kumo. Makes sense, shrugged Raito. They are going to better prepared than most. Genma shot a wide smile at his friend. He could always count on Raito. Wait, but wouldn't the youngest be 10 next year? Kotetsu wondered. Are we going to have another Itachi? I don't think there could ever be a second Itachi, Izumo pointed out, looking around for a clock. He abruptly stood and pulled Kotetsu up with him. We're on shift in 5, so we'll see you guys later. But Zumo, whined Kotetsu. This is some prime gossip right now. They won't care if we're a little late. They will, and we're going, Izumo huffed, dragging his friend towards the door. You need to take your duties more seriously. Good luck with the Jinin. Genma! Kotetsu yelled behind him. Genma chuckled and stood himself. I should go too. I've got to assess them tomorrow and see what we need to work on before the exams. He got a grumble from Anko and a soft goodbye from Kurenai. Raito shot him a warm smile. You've done great with them. Genma smiled back and headed out the door. The same evening, Naruto weaved his way through the village trying to help Kazuya find the flower shop. One of the medics at the hospital had recommended for herbs. He felt a pulse of chakra from his friend and switched directions. It wasn't long before he spotted the purple in the near distance, and he jogged up to stand next to his friend. Looking at the sign above the shop. Yamanaka Flowers. This was the place. He followed Kazuya in, and the scent of flowers overpowered him for a moment. As he looked around at the sea of colors, Kazuya strode to the desk where a blonde girl about Ryo's age was reading a book. She looked up, and sky-blue eyes characteristic of the Yamanaka clan scanned them as she placed the book down. Hi! Welcome to Yamanaka Flowers. Are you looking for something, or just browsing? Hi. Yeah, someone from the hospital told me here was best for herbs and flowers. Kazuya smiled back, and Naruto made his way to stand next to him once again. If you look for medicinal herbs, then the Nara are best for that, she said, flipping the long blonde bang out of her face only for it to settle back in place. We can do flowers, though. Any specifically you're looking for? Kazuya began to dig around his pockets for his list. Your hair is incredible, by the way. What? Naruto blurted out, hand rising to touch the red strands as the girl turned to look at him. He didn't really think about his hair other than to tie it up out of the way. Hana still liked to experiment with it, though, and today she'd braided 2 long strips on each side of his head and brought them together in a small bun. The rest of his hair hung loose in waves over his shoulders. I've never seen that shade of red before, the girl smiled. Who did the braids? My teammate. He dropped his hand from his hair. It's beautiful. Although it's kind of ruined by the orange. Red and orange together are just too much. Naruto frowned as he looked down at his orange t-shirt. What was people's problem with orange? It was a great color. Tell me about it. Kazuya chuckled. I've been trying to tell him for years, but he won't listen. He should stick to blue and black. The girl giggled and took the offered list. Purple will always be best, though. I'm Ino, she grinned. Kazuya, and this eyesore is Naruto. Naruto shoved at his friend, who had the audacity to dodge. We have most of these, but I can ask my dad about the passion flower and jasmine, she shouted behind her as she disappeared through a door. Kazuya turned to him, a mocking grin already plastered across his face. Shut up, Naruto grumbled. She's basically a female you. Kazuya laughed before moving further up the counter, drawn to a pot of delicate pink flowers sitting on the surface. These are cool, he mumbled, reaching out a hand. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Kazuya snapped his hand back as Naruto looked at the tall blonde man that had appeared, Ino close behind. The man took the pot and placed it under the counter with a stern look to his daughter, who looked faintly guilty. Those were Nerium oleander, the man explained. Very poisonous and shouldn't have been left out. Poisonous? Kazuya asked eagerly. Flowers can do many things. They can kill just as easily as heal. Depending on how you use them, a single flower can do both. Kazuya's eyes brightened. Are you looking to become a medic? A good knowledge of poisons would be beneficial for that. The Yamanaka continued. though you seem a bit young for training to be a medic. We're Jinin, Naruto piped up, regretting leaving the headbands behind. People always took them more seriously with the headbands. Really? Ino leaned on the counter. You're like academy age. Naruto muttered about growth spurts under his breath as Kazuya took over. I started studying this stuff like 2 years ago, he stated firmly. I know what I'm doing, Yamanaka-san. Please call me Inoichi. The man waved off. You're the early graduates then? They both nodded. Well, we can get you everything on this list bar the passion flower. We're due a shipment of them in 2 weeks, so if you come back then, Inoichi told them. Giving the list to Ino. Ino will gather them up for you. Can I add a couple poisonous flowers to that order? Kazuya quickly asked, Naruto shooting him a confused look. I can give you the oleanders and calla lilies to start you off, Inoichi nodded. If you need any advice, feel free to come back anytime. We'll make sure to label the flowers too. Probably for the best, Kazuya grinned. Don't want Ryo messing with them. Ryo? Ino popped back into view. Our younger brother, Naruto supplied. He'll probably end up going to the academy with you. Thinking on his brother, Naruto looked around the shop. Flowers have meaning, right? Which ones are used for mourning? Since he'd told Ryo the truth, they hadn't mentioned it since. Maybe it would be good to actually visit their parents' graves before the Rinne festival, to help Ryo come to terms with it. White lilies, Inoichi answered quietly, pointing to the white star-shaped flowers by the entrance. Can I get 2 bouquets of white lilies then? Make that 3? Naruto looked over to see Kazuya smiling sadly at him. Ino finally finished gathering their order and a rainbow of colors covered the counter. Can you guys carry all this? We have a delivery option, Ino asked, eyeing the bundles of flowers. It's cool, Kazuya grinned as he handed over the yen to Inoichi. I don't just hang out with a guy who wears orange for fun. Naruto stuck his tongue out at the brunette as he pulled a scroll from his pocket. He had been working on a new storage seal, and this was the perfect time to test it. He began picking up the flower bundles and sealing them in, moving quickly. That looks a bit different than a normal storage seal, Inoichi commented, coming closer after handing Kazuya the change. Naruto nodded as he pointed to the bit he'd changed. Normal storage seals just seal equipment and ration bars, but aren't great for fresh food, he explained, continuing to seal the flowers. I changed the stasis component of the seal so it would store food and flowers and stuff and keep it fresh the whole time it's sealed. I also had to add a cooling component that would work on the contents of the seal, and that was a nightmare. Oh man, Kazuya groaned at the memory. The living room was freezing for weeks 'cause it kept going wrong. Like you're any better. I remember going to find food and you'd practiced your stitches on everything in the flat. We were pulling threads out of everything for days every time we wanted to eat. Nothing else was soft enough. A cough brought them out of their argument, and they looked to the Yamanakas sheepishly. Sorry, Kazuya offered as Naruto finished up. Yeah, Naruto placed the scroll back in his pocket. Thanks for the flowers. Come back anytime, boys, Inoichi smiled. They bid goodbye and headed out for home. They missed Inoichi's narrowed gaze and contemplative expression. Chapter 13. We've come so far, but we've got so far to go. Genma entered the training ground, spotting his genin stretching beneath the shade of the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. As he came up to them, they each jumped to their feet, still stretching their arms out. He paused for a moment, taking his team in. They'd all grown in the 2 years since they'd become a team. Not just in height, but the way they held themselves had changed. Confidence really made a difference. They wore almost the same outfits as when they'd graduated, although there were subtle changes. Naruto had traded his shorts for black trousers. Genma had made sure both the boys tied up the ends of their trousers with bandages within the first month. Hana had avoided this, sticking with her black biker shorts. He'd managed to wrangle the boys into wearing black on missions, but in the village, he just left them alone. Naruto's orange t-shirts were a major disadvantage in their stealth exercises, even without the long, bright red hair that was tied up in a high, messy bun today. Kazuya was slightly better, muting the purple tunic with an open brown waistcoat, although he was wearing brown gloves today. Thank Kami for Hana, the girls stuck to black. Training today is going to be a bit different today, he announced, immediately attracting wary looks. I know how well you work as a team, but I'm going to fight you individually today to see how far you've come and what you still need to work on. Your aim is to beat me. Why? Kazuya narrowed his eyes as the other two started warming up. I'll tell you later. For now, you boys go sit down. Hana, we'll start with you. Hana darted through the bushes, finding herself back in the clearing. Her breath escaped her harshly and the forming bruises distracted her from her search for her sensei. She sniffed and rolled out the way, her sensei appearing where she had just been standing. She staggered to her feet, throwing a couple of kunai at her sensei to buy herself a breath. Genma-sensei hadn't been kidding when he said he was testing them today. It had started as a taijutsu fight, and Hana felt pretty good about it. Taijutsu was her strong point, and her clan's style was particularly brutal. Against a Junin, though, that didn't mean much. She had managed a couple of good hits, but he'd got twice as many on her. It went downhill from there. He'd trapped her in 3 genjutsu and shot at least 4 fire ninjutsu at her while she had been in the trees, trying to catch him by surprise. Tracking him wasn't the issue. Actually using his location to her advantage was. Even when she's used Shikyaku no Jutsu before entering the trees, this had only just kept her out of reach. She thought she'd managed to catch him out with Bakuretsu Koinu, but the kunai released from the technique missed, and that was the only technique she could use in such an enclosed environment. She didn't have that issue now. Her hands quickly flipped through the familiar seals, the Haimaru brothers gathering around her. Jujin Bunshin, she yelled, smoke briefly clouding her vision as her dogs transformed into her. Gatsuga! She screamed immediately after, spinning with one of the transformed dogs, the other 2 flanking the Junin. She slammed into the ground, Genma-sensei jumping backward and deflecting the swipes from her dog's claws with a kunai. She picked herself back up. She only had enough chakra for one more. Gatsuga! She pushed forward, faster, further. She caught the edge of his arm as he dodged again. As the spin stopped, she felt someone grab her arm and yank her off her feet. As she felt the cold metal tip at her throat, she tried to push down the tears of frustration. Well done. She looked up into her sensei's smiling face as she was helped up. The Haimaru bothers transformed back around her, and she limped towards her teammates, Genma-sensei beside her. She should have done way better. Had she really made so little progress since graduation? Here. Hana looked up from the ground to see Naruto holding out 2 water bottles. She took it gratefully, pouring half of one down her throat and pouring the other into the bowls already set out by the boys. She patted the head of each of the pups, pride briefly dampening her disappointment. They'd done so well. You never told us you had gotten so good with your clan techniques, Kazuya piped up once she put down the empty water bottles. Yeah, grinned Naruto beside him. That was insane. I'd be fucked if you ever broke out a Gatsuga in our spars. She smiled slightly, the boy's comments helping to raise her morale even just by a little bit. She looked towards her sensei. You got me good with that last one, Genma-sensei congratulated. They're right, your clan techniques and taijutsu are shaping up nicely. Hana nodded in thanks, still catching her breath. She watched as Genma-sensei wrapped a bandage around where she'd hit and felt some satisfaction. At least she's managed to land a proper hit on him. He definitely hadn't been taking it easy on her either. Genma-sensei beckoned to Kazuya next, and she lay back, staring at the clear blue sky and taking a moment to feel the soft breeze caress her heated skin. Sometimes it didn't feel real. Often she thought back to that lunchtime, how innocent she had been to how that one question would change her life. Nothing had been easy since that day, and she wouldn't change a thing. She graduated early, the first Inuzuka to do so in over a decade. She was a part of the youngest Genin team in the recorded history of Konoha. She had never seen her mother so happy than the day of her graduation. Best of all, she got to do it all with her best friends. Hana knew the other 2 lived together with Naruto's younger brother. There was a level of friendship between them she doesn't think she could ever compare to. They did everything together. It was rare to see one without the other. They even finished each other's sentences. The closest thing Hana could compare it to was Makoto and Nakano. They were the oldest members of the clan and have been married almost 40 years. Every time Hana saw them, they were either bickering with or helping their other half. It hurt sometimes. When she would hear them talking about things that she hadn't been there for, it made her feel like the odd gen out. When this happened, though, she had to remind herself that the same happened with her. She had an entire clan behind her, and her teammates could never understand that. When it was team training or missions, though, these thoughts never occurred. They were equals, each with something to contribute and something they could help the other with. Hana was the physically strongest with the strongest taijutsu, and she knew she had her clan to thank for that. They were also united in their suffering. No one else had survived being Genma-sensei's students, and Hana knew, even without the bond they had formed in the academy, that the training exercises would have united them. She heaved herself back up, her breathing finally back to a normal rhythm. She returned Naruto's smile and looked over to the clearing just in time to see Kazuya diving for the tree line. Kazuya immediately channeled chakra to his feet and leapt up, sprinting up the tree. As he made it halfway up, he switched trunks and continued to run. He needed to think about this. He didn't have the Hana's taijutsu or Naruto's speed. He had medical jutsu and kunai. He was the smart one, the one with the books. He needed to figure out a plan. This would be so much easier if he knew where Genma-sensei was. He climbed higher as he heard shuriken thump into the section of wood he had just stood on. Think, what can he do to get close? He had his chakra scalpels and his kunai. He had finally managed to distill the oleander from the Yamanakas to a gel-like liquid he had spread on the edges of his kunai, although it had taken him all night. Genma-sensei would dodge that easily if he threw it, and he had a limited supply. He just had to get close to Genma-sensei without getting beaten up. He looked down to see Genma-sensei had joined him on the tree, swirling a kunai on one finger. A dead end this early? I expected better. Kazuya looked around. It was pretty dense, but his sensei was right. He couldn't go any higher. An idea popped into his brain, and if he wasn't so hopped up on adrenaline right now, he would have dismissed it outright. This was an idea worthy of Naruto, which is how he knew it might be crazy enough to work. As his sensei took another step towards him, Kazuya took a kunai out of his pouch, the gloves protecting him from the poison. He sent a prayer to whoever was out there before he pushed off the truck, beginning to fall headfirst towards the ground. He twisted to face the trunk and only caught a glimpse of his sensei's shocked face as he slashed at him, catching the same arm Hana had damaged before. As he continued to fall, he dropped the kunai, frantically pushing chakra into his hands and trying to reach the trunk. He managed to slam his right hand back onto the tree, and a cry left him as he came to an abrupt halt. His shoulder was yanked forward and fully out of its socket. Kazuya cut the chakra and dropped the rest of the way to the ground, unable to roll to distribute the weight. His shoulder screamed, and he couldn't move his arm, but it worked. It worked, and he didn't die. All he had to do was stall. Lessons on fixing a dislocation flashed through his mind, but he didn't have time. He eyed the tree in front of him as his sensei's footsteps finally started back up. He ran into the tree, screaming as his shoulder was shoved back into place. He barely scrambled away in time and shot back towards the clearing. He broke through the tree line and turned back to face his sensei as he also emerged. Kazuya wiggled his fingers. Okay, good. They still moved? He hadn't damaged the nerves. It hurt so much, though. He hadn't hurt like this since he lived with his uncle. He focused on his sensei in front of him and formed the chakra scalpels he'd painstakingly practiced over the past year and a half. Genma-sensei eyed them warily as Kazuya exploded forward. His sensei flashed to his right side, and Kazuya couldn't raise the scalpel in time to stop the hand that forced his head in the ground. He released the chakra and just puffed angrily into the dirt. That had been pathetically short. Good effort. Genma-sensei took his hand away and rolled him over, checking Kazuya's shoulder. Short, but that move you pulled surprised me. If you hadn't dislocated your arm doing it, it would have worked brilliantly. Those chakra scalpels too, you'd be excellent in close quarters if you trained on them specifically for combat rather than the hospital. He helped him up, and Kazuya followed him back to the others. His eyes caught the beads of blood on his sensei's sleeve, and he grinned. "I didn't totally lose, sensei." Genma turned to him in confusion, and Kazuya plonked himself next to Hana. "I cut you." Genma nodded, not getting it. "I would have died then, but you'd be dead in a few hours," he explained, throwing Naruto the scroll that had thankfully stayed in his pocket. The redhead rested his hand on the scroll and soon summoned a vial of light purple liquid. He offered it to Genma, and their sensei took it with growing understanding. "Nerium oleander," Kazuya grinned. "Pretty flower, nasty poison." He watched Genma-sensei knock back the antidote, and a sense of pride glowed within him at the grin on Genma-sensei's face. "Brilliant. When did you start getting into poisons?" "Yesterday." "What?" "You literally spent all night making that," Naruto offered, shooting a fond but exasperated look his way. "He literally bought the flowers yesterday and spent the whole night figuring out how to weaponize it." Genma stared at him for a moment longer before his head was thrown back in a loud laugh. He shook his head. "Even 2 years later, you're still surprising me." Kazuya another thought and decided he might as well say it now. "I know my dream now, sensei." At the looks from his team, he continued. "I want to be the best poison expert in the elemental nations." "I thought you were going to be a medic nin." Naruto wondered, raising a red brow. "I am." Kazuya nodded. "When I say I'm going to be the best, I mean it all. Best at using it, making it, and treating it. Best at using the same flower to kill enemies and help allies. I'm going to be both the medical expert and fighting expert when it comes to poison, and the best at using these same ingredients as a medic nin to help people." It had come to him at 2 a.m. that morning, as he'd sat surrounded by books and on his third attempt at distilling the concentrated poison. This is what he wanted to do. He'd loved working in the hospital, but nothing had truly grabbed him. Not like this. "I'm glad you figured out your dream, Kazuya." Genma-sensei smiled. "It's an awesome dream," Hana added. He looked to Naruto to see the younger boy holding out a fist. He brought his good arm up and bumped it. "You're gonna be amazing, Pinkubaka." "You know it, Aka-chan." Naruto pulled his fist back and stood, bouncing slightly in place. Since he was last, he'd had some time to prepare, and his new explosive tags were firmly stuck to his kunai, ready to be launched. He was almost definitely sure Genma-sensei had chosen this order specifically to give him more time to prepare. Hana was the strongest, so she had no time to plan, and Kazuya only had a short time to figure something out, being the next strongest. That left him for last, the youngest and weakest of the team. He followed his sensei to the center of the clearing. The trees weren't an option. He knew what the other two had been going for, but it wouldn't work against a Junin. They couldn't beat him with taijutsu, so they went for the guerrilla tactics. They'd been practically living in the trees since they graduated, so against a shinobi from any other village it might have worked. It was also difficult to use long-range tactics since Genma-sensei was fast enough to dodge if they didn't catch him by surprise. They came to a stop in the middle of the clearing, and Naruto faced the Junin, swallowing his nerves. As Genma-sensei called for the start, Naruto dropped his hand into his pouch and snapped his kunai out, spraying them out in all directions. Genma-sensei cocked his head. "What are you aiming for?" Naruto scanned the field. Good, he managed to cover at least half the clearing. His attention was grasped by Genma-sensei appearing in front of him. Naruto dove to the side and flashed through his modified hand seals for Kawarimi. He switched with one of the kunai on the outer edges, and as he hit the ground, quickly formed the modified snake seal to trigger the kunai closest to where he could feel Genma-sensei. He grinned as an explosion rocked the air. Worth every single time he set fire to the coffee table, and the trees after Kazuya had kicked him out when his medical textbooks got a bit singed. His grin dropped as the explosions kept going, a chain reaction that was rapidly working its way to him. He scrambled away and stood, watching the massive trail of smoke rise into the air as the explosions died out. Note to self: space kunai further apart. Naruto ducked as he felt Genma-sensei pop up behind him. He swept his leg back, but his sensei jumped and the two separated to face each other. Naruto's grin returned at the sight of the soot covering Genma-sensei's face, although it looked like he had avoided the actual fire part. Not bad, Naruto. But what will you do now? You've used up your best weapons. Bold of you to assume those were my only weapons. Genma-sensei opened his mouth, but before he could comment, Naruto threw another kunai into the air above. Kai! He rolled out of the way as the boulder he'd stored into the seal appeared, dropping to where they had just stood with a loud thud. Naruto smothered a laugh as swearing reached him from where his sensei had dodged. He reached back into his kunai pouch and took another 2 kunai out. Only 3 left. He had no idea what was in these. It'd been so long since he prepared these ones. Maybe he should note these things down in the future. He threw one to roughly the area he could sense his sensei and released the storage seal. As a deluge of water rained down, he felt Genma-sensei appear behind him and pain shot through his head. As he felt another blow to his leg, he dropped to his knees, frantically yelling Kai and hoping this one didn't have the other boulder. Packets of instant ramen appeared, and Naruto groaned. He definitely needed to label these things in the future. He felt Sensei's kunai on the back of his neck and groaned louder, leg and head throbbing. His sensei lifted the kunai, and he rolled over, panting. That had been even shorter than Kazuya's. Genma-sensei helped him up and helped him back to the rest of team. Naruto tried to keep the tears at bay. He knew he was the worst on the team, but this was pathetic. He stared at the ground as he sat down, shame filling him. Hey, Naruto looked up into his sensei's eyes. You're incredible, you know that? Shock raced through him. He was present for that fight, right? I don't even know Junin who can use seals so creatively. Yeah, Akachan, Kazuya piped up. You literally dropped a boulder on him. And blew him up. Hana added. Yeah, Genma-sensei grimaced, looking back at the ruined training ground. You really went all out. Naruto wiped the tears off his cheek, chuckling. So, Genma-sensei clapped his hands. Let's review today's training. Naruto's smile dropped, and he shared nervous glances with the other genin. So I know you're wondering why we did this today. You mean why you suddenly decided to kick our ass? Kazuya interrupted. Genma-sensei shot him a look, but continued. I wanted to get a feel for your abilities as a whole. I know your skill level in stealth and intelligence gathering from your missions, and you all passed the dodge training within 10 minutes now. I didn't test the full range of taijutsu, genjutsu, and ninjutsu today, but what mattered was how you coped with a stronger opponent. Their sensei grinned around his senbon. You're high genin level in all these basics, but it's the extra stuff you've been doing that pushes you all to almost chunin level. Chunin? Genma-sensei smiled at Hana. I'm going to nominate you for the chunin exams, he announced cheerfully. Naruto's voice joined his teammates in shock before a thought occurred to him. Wait, it's in Iwa this year. I'm talking about next year's July exam in Kumo, Genma-sensei nodded. We did this to see what we need to improve before then. Hana, your taijutsu and clan techniques are already chunin level along with your tracking, but your stealth needs a lot of work. Your genjutsu and weapon handling need improvement too, and although you're physically the strongest, you're also the slowest. He turned to Kazuya next. You panicked, which meant you got both corralled and injured. You're at a disadvantage compared to these two in situational awareness. But I know you're the best at genjutsu and strategy. Your medical jutsu are really coming along too. Those scalpels could really be incredible if you got the hang of them. You could be brilliant in close-range combat with both your scalpels and poisons in the mix. Finally, he set his warm brown eyes on Naruto. Your basics need a lot of work, but between your sensing and fuinjutsu, you can keep up no problem. You're the fastest on the team. Your weapon handling has come a long way, and even with your red hair, you are the best as far as stealth and tracking go. I meant it when I said you were incredible when it came to fuinjutsu. The plan you had to swap with the kunai to keep out of reach and blow me up at the same time was good, but there are some kinks we need to work out. So essentially, we suck as much as we're awesome? Kazuya summarized, chin in his hand. You've all come a long way. Genma-sensei took a seat. On our first day, you couldn't dodge a kunai. Now you're good enough to ruffle a junin on your own. Naruto took in their sensei's appearance. Some of the soot had been washed off his face from the water, and the bandana covering his hair was more black than blue at this point. His uniform was rumpled, and bandages were wrapped around his arm. We didn't even get you to spit out the senbon, though, he pointed out. That's a Junin exam-level feat, Genma-sensei winked. He reached into one of his pockets and pulled out 4 small sheets of blank paper. We can work on your individual weaknesses, but there is something we can work on that concerns all of you, he said, handing each of the Genin one and keeping one for himself. You all need to expand your ninjutsu repertoire. Genma-sensei held up his paper, and Naruto's eyes widened as they watched it catch fire and burn up. This is chakra paper, and it tells you which element you have a natural inclination for, Genma explained, brushing the ashes from his fingers. As you saw, mine is fire, which is the most common in Konoha. Naruto looked down at his own paper and sent a pulse of chakra through his right arm. As the paper sliced cleanly in half, Naruto looked up to see his friend's papers crumble to ash in a similar manner to their sensei. Okay, so Hana and Kazuya, you have the same as me. Fire is strong against wind, but weak against water. Naruto, you have wind which is weak to fire but strong against lightning. Genma folded his arms. This is a great mix for combinations since Naruto's wind techniques would make you choose fire even stronger. So, we're going to learn ninjutsu? Kazuya asked, wiping his hand on his trousers. Once you become Chunin, you can learn how to change your chakra into your chakra element, but for now, you don't need to do that. Knowing your natures just makes it easier for you to learn your element's jutsu. We'll start off with a couple C-ranks jutsu next week to get you started. Their sensei stood, and Naruto slowly followed, rubbing his leg. Right now, though, we'll go get you checked out at the hospital. Naruto followed his teammates out of the training ground, limping but excited for the year to come. He could be a Chunin this time next year. Ryo stumbled into the apartment, panting and wheezing as he landed face first on the couch, as his brothers walked in behind him, talking about something he was too wiped to listen to. Want some breakfast? He groaned loudly into the pillow. That's a yes, then. They hadn't been kidding when they said they were going to start his training for the academy. They'd started dragging him out at the crack of dawn to build up his stamina, and Ryo could only make about 2 laps. He'd spent most of the time dying by the gates as he watched them appear each time they completed a lap. He hadn't bothered counting. That wasn't even going into the torture of the press-ups and sit-ups and horrifying things called burpees. It had taken a while for it all to sink in, but in the time since he'd found out about his parents and the Kyuubi, nothing had really changed. Nisan and Kazumi didn't treat him any different. If anything, Nisan had been more open than ever, telling him stories about the family he never got to know. Ryo looked at things a little differently now, though, the new information filling in gaps that he hadn't even realized were there. A knock came from the door, and Ryo could hear Kiba's loud greeting. Oh man, he had promised to hang with Kiba at the park today. His friend landed on top of him, and Ryo yelped, sitting up abruptly and dumping the Inuzuka on the ground. He glared down at his best friend as he sat up grumpily, limbs protesting as he melted back into the cushions. What's up with you? He went out training with us, Nisan spoke up, sitting down heavily beside Ryo and flinging his arm around Ryo's shoulders. We've started him on the training menu we used when we were your age. Kiba nodded in understanding. Mom has been putting me through the ringer too, he grumbled, ruffling his already messy brown hair. I could barely walk after the first training session. Would you believe me if I told you that you'll grow to enjoy it? Nisan laughed like the sadist he was. Naruto, move your stuff from the table. Nisan sighed and got back up. Ryo watched him gather his sealing stuff from the table and move it into his room. He wasn't allowed to touch that stuff, and he'd seen enough incidents of it going wrong that he was willing to follow that rule to the letter. They were on their 3rd coffee table, and Ryo was still wondering why they kept getting wooden ones. Kiba, come set the table, and Ryo, go wash up a bit. Ryo heaved himself up to the bathroom as his friend bounced into the kitchen. Once he felt marginally more human, he went back through and plonked himself next to Kiba at the table. Have you guys got training or missions today? He asked, as Kazumi set out the 4 plates of omelette rice. Nisan put down the bowls of miso soup next to the plates, holding up his hands as Kiba shot him a look. I didn't make it, just helped carry it over. We don't want a repeat of Ramen Week. Ni-san shot a betrayed look at Kazu-ni, as Ryo muffled his giggles. Kazuya-ni, you can't ever get a cold ever again, Kiba laughed out loud. Try once to help out and stop my family from starving, and this is what I get. Ni-san dropped into his seat opposite Ryo, an offended look wavering into a grin. I liked Ramen Week, Ryo chirped. Of course you did. Kazu-ni rolled his eyes, placing the steaming cups of tea on the table before taking a seat himself. I've raised you so well. Ni-san wiped a fake tear from his eye. Ryo clapped his hands and thanked Kazu-ni for the meal before digging in. So missions or training? Ryo repeated. I'm at the hospital today, Kazu-ni shrugged. I finally convinced Takeda-sensei to let me shadow him in the poisons division. I'll get to see the different treatment techniques, and if I'm lucky, I can pick his brain for some decent books. Ryo shared a disgusted look with Kiba at the mention of books. It was definitely not their strong suit. I've got taijutsu training all day, added Ni-san. Got a new menu from Guy that's going to add some power to my kicks. Ni-san is with Mum today, said they were going to work on her coordination with the dogs. Kiba shoved some more egg into his mouth, the red fangs on his cheeks bulging out. And you two? We're going to the park, Ryo answered his brother. Shikamaru and Choji are going to meet us there. That's the Nara and the Akimichi, right? Kazumi asked, taking a sip of tea. Ryo nodded with his mouth full, and Kiba took over. Yeah, they're going to be in the academy with us. Ryo swallowed, washing it down with the warm green tea. Shikamaru is super lazy and wants to look at clouds all day, but he's really smart, he added. Choji always has the best snacks. They'd met the pair the month before at the same park they were meeting at today. Ryo had tripped over Shikamaru while he'd been gazing at the sky, and by the time he'd picked himself back up and apologized to the other boy, Kiba had begun sharing food with Choji. Last week there had been some blonde girl who yelled at his new friends. Ryo was hoping she wouldn't be there this time. You can bring the rice balls I made yesterday with you to share for lunch. Kazu-ni offered. Thanks, Kazuya-ni. Kiba cheered. You make the best food. Are we going to meet these new friends? Probably, Ryo shrugged. Calm down, Akachan, Kazumi chuckled. Maybe worry about that new seal you've been working on. It's finished, Ni-san frowned. If by finished you mean that it's meant to zap you every time you use it, then yes, you're all done. Ryo finished up his last mouthful and began to help Ni-san clear the table. Kiba joining them after a moment as Kazuya sat back and nursed his cup of tea. Smart-ass. Just skilled in pointing things out that dumbasses can't figure out for themselves. Ryo snorted as Ni-san repeated Kazumi's comment in a high, nasally voice. They got all the dishware next to the sink, and Ryo moved to grab the box of rice balls to shove into his backpack next to the door. As he shoved his feet into his sandals, Kiba bounced next to the door. Thanks for the food, Naruto-ni, Kazuya-ni. Have a good day. Dinner's curry tonight. Ryo yelled a bye over his shoulder as he and Kiba left the apartment. Beginning to make their way down the stairs. I love hanging out at yours, Kiba grinned next to him. Your family is great. Yeah, they are, Ryo smiled. His family was the best. Chapter 14, Challenge Accepted. Tenjiro looked up from his inventory list to see his two favorite genin enter the store, their hands moving rapidly into shapes he could vaguely recognize as sign language. They came up to the counter, each high-fiving Tenten as she sat on the counter swinging her legs. Hello, boys, he smiled, placing his brush down. What are you up to today? Naruto opened his mouth to say something, but Kazuya elbowed him in the ribs. Tenjiro watched the pair in confusion as they moved their hands again, and he shared an amused glance with his daughter. Come on, Pinku Baka, Genma-sensei will never know we spoke out loud. He'll find out. Well, too late, we're both speaking now. Kazuya rolled his eyes and turned to him. If you see Genma-sensei, you can't tell him we were talking. Tenjiro held up his hand as Tenten muffled her giggles. On my honor. Now do you want to tell us why? Genma-sensei banned us from talking out loud since we're learning the Konoha sign language. He feels that we'll learn it better if we're totally immersed. On the bright side, Ryo has now started to learn it out of necessity. Naruto added. On the downside? It has been impossible trying to organize things for the Chunin exams next month. You're going to the Chunin exams? Tenten piped up, her brown eyes shining. Yup, we're leaving for Kumo in 3 weeks, Kazuya grinned. We've sorted the rent and stuff for the month or so we'll be away, but we're still stocking up on supplies. Wow, Tenten cheered. Wow yourself, Naruto praised. How's the academy going? I love it, she beamed. I'm the best at target practice, but this other kid Neji keeps beating me on the rest. It's good to not start at the top, Kazuya advised. It's better to work your way up over time because you'll learn more that way. Very true, Tenjiro nodded. Do you have your list of those supplies? Always. Kazuya smirked as he withdrew the crumpled paper from his pocket and handed it over. Tenjiro glanced over the list, mentally casting his mind to the different boxes he'd find each of these in. All right, we have everything. I can get it all for you now. Tenji-san, here. Naruto handed over a couple of storage scrolls. You can put them in here. I labeled them weapons and supplies so it'll save you carrying them all. Tenjiro nodded and took the scroll, moving through to the back and starting to gather the items on the list, keeping one ear on the conversation. What else are you doing for the exams? Well, our taijutsu and weapon handling is pretty good, and we've got a few C-rank jutsu now, too. Really? Tenten burst out, and Tenjiro can imagine his daughter's eyes sparkling the way they did when they got new weapons in the store. Which ones? I've got a couple Katon, and Akachan has some futon. We also had to learn some E-rank jutsu, like making a campfire, checking for water contamination, and stuff like that. You'll learn those ones when you graduate. Wow. Tenten breathed. Can we not learn them in the academy? There was a small pause before Naruto spoke up. You can, but you need decent chakra control first, and you'll start that next year. The main thing you should be working on now is your fitness. Want a tip for the academy? Kazuya added. Another pause reached Tenjiro, which he assumed was Tenten nodding. Learn things that aren't talked about in class. You will be surprised about how much about being a shinobi is only learned after you leave the academy. Gigi should really do something about that. Huh, Tenten muttered. Hey Naruni, can I do your hair? Kasan is making me practice doing it myself. Sure. There was a muffled thump. Where's Ryo today? I think he's at the park with some of the clan kids, Kazuya spoke up. Probably convincing them to either cause general chaos or working on those katas we gave him. I would argue that Kiba is just as likely to cause chaos as Ryo, said Naruto. I already feel bad for the Academy Chunin next year. Like you were any better. I was dragged into trouble by you. I didn't drag you anywhere. Tenjiro sealed the last of the soldier pills into the scroll and made his way back to the counter. He was greeted by the sight of Naruto sitting on the floor, his hair in the same style as Tenten's, and Kazuya leaning on the counter beside a giggling Tenten. Here you are, lads. Tenjiro placed the scrolls on the counter, and Naruto rose from his seat, grabbing them and stuffing them into his pockets. Kazuya put yen in its place, and Tenjiro took it, handing the boy his change. Also, something they don't tell you about the Chunin exams, Naruto piped up. They're expensive. We have to buy supplies and make sure Ryo is all set up here, plus we miss out on at least 2 months of missions at the minimum to even sit them. Not including missions, we miss doing extra training, Kazuya added. Naruto nodded, crossing his arms. We also know there are going to be 3 stages, and one of them is about survival in the wilderness somewhere, so we've got to bring literally everything. Kazuya continued. There's no guarantee that we're going to be able to come back between stages either. How do you know that? Tenjiro raised an eyebrow. They're different in every village. Research, Kazuya shrugged. Of course. We're the only team going from Konoha, so we have to get through to the finals, Naruto shrugged. I think you're gonna win the whole thing. Tenten piped up. Hell yeah, we are, Kazuya grinned, bumping his fist against hers. Are you really? The 2 boys snapped towards the voice, and Tenjiro shared a wink with Genma. He'd noticed the Junin enter the store with Raido, but figured it would be a lesson in awareness for the Jinin. Akachan, why didn't you notice him? Kazuya hissed. I'm fucking tired, Pinkubaka, Naruto snapped back. I've slept like 3 hours in the past 3 days with all the border patrols to pay for this shitty exam. I'm adding another 10 laps to your training for the rest of the week, Genma announced, not even trying to hide the gleeful amusement. Great, Kazuya muttered. Another day. Kazuya makes some hand gestures that Tenjiro didn't need to know sign language to interpret. Naruto just sighed and waved to Tenten, dragging his friend past the Junin and throwing the sign for thank you behind him as they left. Don't you think you're a bit hard on them sometimes? Tenjiro helped the waving Tenten down from the counter and ushered her through to the back. Go do your homework, he called after his daughter as he turned back to the Junin. I don't give them more than they can handle, Genma shrugged. If I didn't make things hard, they'd be at my door within a day complaining they were bored. Tenjiro considered the two boys in question and could only agree. Naruto took in the tall spires of rock in the light of the setting sun. This must be why they called Kumo the village in the clouds. The majority of the buildings were high off the ground, built into the rocks that ended in a point towards the sky. It was so different to any of the other villages they had been to for their C ranks. The village was literally built into the mountains with wide pathways connecting the buildings far above their heads. They had a few shops on the ground level on either side of the wide yellow path that ran through the village. It was quiet as Naruto and his team were following a Kumonin to the hotel they'd been designated during their stay. As the Kumonins stopped at the base of one of the rock spires, Naruto leaned over to Hana, whispering, "What happens if you're afraid of heights?" She frowned and lightly shoved his shoulder. Shinobi literally can't be afraid of heights, otherwise they wouldn't be a ninja. There must have been at least one. Probably not from here though, Kazuya chimed in. Or any of the major villages, really. All the places we've been to have got pretty high buildings, except maybe the Land of Iron. We spend a lot of time off the ground on missions, Hana shrugged. Huh! Naruto put his hands behind his head. I never really thought about that. Kazuya rolled his eyes. Before he could respond, Genma turned to them and started herding them through the door and up the stairs. As they reached the second floor, their sensei opened a door with a key. Naruto didn't remember him receiving. There was one bed in the far left corner, a window in the right wall, and that was pretty much it. A door to his left led to what Naruto hoped was a bathroom. He crossed over and dumped his backpack against the far wall, his teammates following suit. He sat hard on the wooden floor as Genma-sensei sat on the bed opposite. There were so many new signatures in the building with them, and he wasn't sure how to start picking them apart. Okay team, Genma-sensei clapped his hands as Hana and Kazuya found a seat on the floor next to him. We're the last here and we're sharing this hotel with the other villages. Less time to rest, but also less time for someone to sabotage us. Is Kumo still pissed at us? Kazuya groaned. We're not their favorites, their sensei admitted. Iwa is also rooming here, so we have to tread carefully. No picking fights or anything that can be taken as disrespect outside of the exams. What about in the exams? Everyone and anything is fair game. Genma-sensei grinned with all his teeth at Hana. Okay, so they start tomorrow and there's no breaks, so make sure to pack properly tonight. So Kumo and Iwa are going to try to kill us specifically. Pretty much, Genma-sensei shrugged. There are always fatalities in the Chunin exams, you just need to make sure it's not you. Great, Kazuya sighed. Naruto, get those security seals up. Kazuya and Hana, decide between you who's washing up first. You need as much sleep tonight as you can for tomorrow. Naruto tuned out the ensuing game of Jan Kenpo to dig out his newest work from his backpack. He had managed to finish and test it only a week ago, but they were designed for situations like this. He stuck his first one in the center of the door and sent a pulse of chakra through his fingertips, watching the seal light briefly with blue chakra before it settled down. He repeated this at each of the possible entry points of the room. Done, Genma-sensei, he called out. If anyone that's not one of us comes within 2 meters of the entry points, we'll know. They were basically the seal version of his sensing abilities, but he couldn't be awake all the time. This would give them peace of mind to sleep tonight. Genma-sensei wouldn't allow him to use the exploding version, stating that they couldn't blow up foreign shinobi in a foreign village outside of the exams. Good work, Genma-sensei grinned. Now, wash up and get some sleep. You've got some villages to crush tomorrow. Kazuya looked around at the other competitors as he stood with his team in the corner of the large hall. He was feeling the pressure of being the only Konoha team as people with various different headbands glared at them. The strongest coming from the red-clad Iwanins in the opposite corners. Is Kumo 3 people to the left of us? Naruto piped up. Ah. Kazuya drawled, looking past the Kusanin beside them to see the engraved clouds on their heads. Yeah, why? He turned to look at his friend who had his eyes closed. His eyes closed, surrounded by foreign nin. He and Hana were there to watch his back, but this was ridiculous. They feel different. Naruto's blue eyes snapped open. He looked straight through Kazuya to something he was sure only Naruto could see. I've thought this before, but shinobi from other villages feel different. There's something about their chakra. Kazuya's sweat dropped. Was this really the time? Don't get him wrong. This was brilliant, but not much use right now when everyone was from a different village. Like I can feel how much chakra they have and where it is, but I didn't know for sure about the different villages. Naruto's eyes came into focus abruptly. Wait, do you think I could tell a difference by chakra natures? Cool idea, but not important right now, Hana cut in. Test it when we're back home, where everyone doesn't want to kill us. I mean, I'm pretty sure some of the academy teachers want us at least. Kazuya cut himself off at the fierce glare from his female teammate. Not right now. A Kumonin entered the room and stood in front of the door with his thick arms crossed, his brown eyes narrowed which were only slightly darker than his skin. Kazuya shot a brief glance over the room and watched his competitors quiet down. Welcome to your Chunin exams. I am Ine and your proctor for these exams. Try not to die before showing your full strength. A cheery welcome, Kazuya muttered beneath his breath as he dodged an elbow from Hana. Stage 1 begins now. Behind the man, more Kumonin entered the room carrying medium-sized wooden boxes and placing them on the ground beside the proctor. One person from each team. Come collect a box. The Kumonin who had entered with the boxes moved to stand against the walls of the room, essentially forming a border that had eyes on the participants. Kazuya nervously grinned at his team as he stepped to the front of the room to grab a box. It didn't appear to be anything special. It wasn't heavy, but there was a number combination lock embedded in the front of it and an irregular number of rectangles on the top surface. He moved back to stand with his team. Once you have your box, sit in your teams at least an arm's length from the other teams. Kazuya exchanged confused glances with his teammates. They had figured that there were 3 stages and one involved getting chucked in the wilderness, but the exam changed every year. No 2 villages had the same exam, so they had no clue what the first stage could involve. Inside the box is a scroll. To pass, you must open the box and hand me that scroll. You cannot damage the scroll or the box in any way. You have 1 hour. There will be no collaboration between teams, and any caught cheating will be expelled immediately from this exam. Kazuya watched in horror as Naruto threw his hand up. Question, Konoha? What counts as cheating? The Kumonin eyes his friend, and Kazuya prays that they won't be chucked out on the spot. If you get caught collaborating with other teams, copying another team, breaking or in any way damaging the wooden box or stealing another team's scroll, it will be considered cheating, and you will be escorted out. Naruto nodded his head and thankfully kept quiet. The Kumonin watched them for another long moment before sweeping his gaze across the room. You have 1 hour. Start. Murmurs began to spread throughout the room, and Kazuya placed the box at the center of their team. So to state the obvious, we could try different number combinations? Hana began, moving the box to look at the embedded 4-pin lock. That'll take forever, and we don't have time to try them all. Kazuya shook his head, pushing it towards Naruto. Any seals or anything chakra-related we should know about? Naruto took the box and turned it over in his hands. Nope, he said. I can't sense anything from it. It's just a locked box. There's no obvious hinges either we could unscrew, Kazuya muttered, placing a hand beneath his chin. Do any of the shapes on the top move? Naruto pushed against the scattered rectangles on the top. Kazuya's mind raced as they moved, but before long it became obvious that they only moved in a certain pattern. Well, we can't force it open, Hana sighed, taking the box from Naruto. The most obvious thing is the numbers. But we have literally nothing to give us a clue where to start with those, Kazuya pointed out. Do we have anything on us that could open it? Naruto shook his head. All my jutsu would damage it, and I don't have a seal for that either. Kazuya was about to add something when Hana chimed in. Don't the rules seem a bit off, though? There's no way our whole first test is opening a box. There has to be some else. There's always something else. Plus, Naruto added. He was very specific about his wording when he explained the cheating. Kazuya briefly scanned the rest of the room. The other teams were in tight huddles, heads down, and although there was a low murmur, he couldn't pick any individual words out. He then switched to looking at the proctors scattered throughout the room. There was one for each team. Why would they need that many? Surely they didn't need this many people to watch Jinins? Something about this whole thing feels off. Both his teammates turned to look at him. Naruto, are you sure you can't sense anything strange? His friend closed his eyes and frowned, tilting his head slightly to the side. Opening his eyes, he turned to look around at the other participants. You have 1 hour. There will be no collaboration between teams, and any caught cheating will be expelled immediately from this exam. Kazuya watched in horror as Naruto threw his hand up. Question, Konoha? What counts as cheating? The Kumonin eyes his friend, and Kazuya prays that they won't be chucked out on the spot. If you get caught collaborating with other teams, copying another team, breaking or in any way damaging the wooden box or stealing another team's scroll, it will be considered cheating, and you will be escorted out. Naruto nodded his head and thankfully kept quiet. The Kumonin watched them for another long moment before sweeping his gaze across the room. You have 1 hour. Start. Murmurs began to spread throughout the room, and Kazuya placed the box at the center of their team. So to state the obvious, we could try different number combinations? Hana began, moving the box to look at the embedded 4-pin lock. That'll take forever, and we don't have time to try them all. Kazuya shook his head, pushing it towards Naruto. Any seals or anything chakra-related we should know about? Naruto took the box and turned it over in his hands. Nope, he said. I can't sense anything from it. It's just a locked box. There's no obvious hinges either we could unscrew, Kazuya muttered, placing a hand beneath his chin. Do any of the shapes on the top move? Naruto pushed against the scattered rectangles on the top. Kazuya's mind raced as they moved, but before long it became obvious that they only moved in a certain pattern. Well, we can't force it open, Hana sighed, taking the box from Naruto. The most obvious thing is the numbers. But we have literally nothing to give us a clue where to start with those, Kazuya pointed out. Do we have anything on us that could open it? Naruto shook his head. All my jutsu would damage it, and I don't have a seal for that either. Kazuya was about to add something when Hana chimed in. Don't the rules seem a bit off, though? There's no way our whole first test is opening a box. There has to be some else. There's always something else. Plus, Naruto added. He was very specific about his wording when he explained the cheating. Kazuya briefly scanned the rest of the room. The other teams were in tight huddles, heads down, and although there was a low murmur, he couldn't pick any individual words out. He then switched to looking at the proctors scattered throughout the room. There was one for each team. Why would they need that many? Surely they didn't need this many people to watch Jinins? Something about this whole thing feels off. Both his teammates turned to look at him. Naruto, are you sure you can't sense anything strange? His friend closed his eyes and frowned, tilting his head slightly to the side. Opening his eyes, he turned to look around at the other participants. Everyone is where they should be. There's so much chakra in this room, it's hard to tell them all apart unless I really focus, like I could before we had guards and a time limit. Kazuya looked away from his friend to look at the clock, only to swear at the sight. How has it already been 20 minutes? What? Hana demanded, joining him in staring the clock. Kazuya picked up the box once again and examined it again. There really was no way to open this thing without the number code, not without damaging it. There was a small gap between the lid and the bottom of the box, maybe small enough to... Can either of you make chakra threads? Nope, my control is nowhere near good enough for that, Naruto shrugged. But your control is best of all of us. Chakra threads are different, Naruto explained to Hana. They're only really used by some Sunanin, because they're more hassle than the result is worth. They're solid chakra constructs, and I have no idea how to do those outside of jutsu. Can you try? Kazuya handed the box to the redhead. It's the only thing that might fit through that gap. Naruto signed and held up his right hand, the box in his left. As his friend's fingertips began to glow, Kazuya looked back to the clock to see another 10 minutes had passed. They had been in this exam for 30 minutes. He looked around, and none of the other teams had succeeded either. In fact, they were all exactly the same as he last time he had looked. Surely one team must have passed or kicked out by now. As he looked back at his team, he examined the test so far. No way had it been 30 minutes, there was just no way. Naruto's head snapped up, and he froze for a moment before dropping the box. It landed heavily on the floor. I can feel some people leaving the room. Kazuya glanced over to the door, but there was nothing there. That confirmed it. I think we're in a genjutsu. Naruto swore and turned to glare at the nearest proctor. Naruto, what? Kazuya demanded. What did you sense? Her chakra is in our system, the redhead frowned. It's such a small amount I couldn't feel it with everything else clogging up my senses. I hate genjutsu. Okay. So we just need to break out of it, Hana said slowly. Kazuya brought his hands into a seal and flooded his system with chakra. Kai. As he opened his eyes and looked around, another team stood and handed their scroll to the proctor. The clock indicated that it had only been 7 minutes since the test had started, and the tense knot in his gut loosened at the sight. He could hear the teams still around them much clearer now, but some were obviously still stuck in the genjutsu. Now what? Kazuya shrugged as Hana stared back at him. We still have nothing on the numbers, she pointed out. I'm not going to get usable chakra threads in time, Naruto added. Kazuya brought his hand back up to his chin and thought. So they got through the first obstacle? But there must be a second one. As he stared at the movable rectangles on top of the box, something clicked. Kai? Numbers appeared on the top of the box as his teammates looked on in confusion. It's a double-layered genjutsu, he explained. There's one on the top of the box too. He picked up the box to the chorus of his team, breaking out of the illusion. He moved the pieces in the same pattern they had discovered at the beginning of the test, and a clear number stood out. He dialed it into the number combination, and the lid popped open. He grabbed the scroll and stood with his team, walking over to the proctor and handing him the scroll. The Kumonin leveled them with a glare, before motioning to the door behind him. Kazuya grinned as he left the room, holding in his joy until they were led to a room down the corridor from the exam hall. Ignoring the glowering enemy teams, Kazuya threw his hands up as he yelled in victory. I knew genjutsu would come back to bite me in the ass, muttered Hana, crouching to pet her dogs. I'm just happy we have Kazuya on the team. Naruto grinned. No way would we have figured out the second one. What's weird is how many shinobi Kumo has that are able to perform a double-layer genjutsu. They're all about brute strength usually. Hana nodded her head in agreement. Genjutsu messes with the 5 senses. Too bad they didn't count on Naruto using his 6th one. Naruto rolled his eyes, but failed to push down his smile. We lucked out that I sensed those teams leaving, but I have really got to work on sensing foreign chakra entering our systems. Kazuya messed up his friend's ponytail. Either way, they were through to the second stage, and Kazuya had full faith in his team. They were going to make it all the way. Naruto sat with his team in a corner of the waiting room, waiting for the first exam to end. There was just over half of the original teams present, allowing him to pick apart their chakra in more detail now. There was definitely a difference between the villages. The Kumo teams had the same metallic feeling as the Kumo Nien from the Hyuga affair, but there was Kumo Nien in particular that he had his eye on. She looked only a year or two older than Hana, with blonde hair and a long, low ponytail, and a baggy, olive-colored jumpsuit with short sleeves. We need to stay away from her as much as possible. What? Naruto turned back to his teammates and realized he hadn't shared what he'd found. It was easy sometimes to forget that others didn't have an extra sense permanently sending them information about people around him. It was just so obvious to him that he logged the information automatically, sometimes failing to realize he needed to state it out loud. The Kumo girl in the green, he explained. The blonde over there. His teammates looked over and frowned. Why? She has more chakra than the three of us combined, Naruto answered Hana, as a thoughtful look dawned over Kazuya. Willing to bet she knows how to use it too. He discreetly signed Ryo's name out of sight of Hana, and Naruto nodded, signing same back to the brunette. That girl had a biju. Naruto knew better than most about the potential danger of a tailed beast. His attention was drawn to the front of the room as the same proctor from before entered the room. You have all passed the first stage. Follow me to the location of the second stage. Naruto exchanged a look with his team before following Ine out of the room. He double-checked the seals that had been painted into his pockets as he walked. They weren't allowed to take a bag into the exam, but there was nothing in the rules that said they couldn't take anything in. So, in the early hours of the morning, he had painted the pockets of each of his teammates' clothes with storage seals so all the equipment they had brought could be on them without breaking any rules. Before long, they came to the border of the village and a wooden table piled with papers. The proctor turned to them. An equally sour-looking Kumonin sat behind the table. This is the beginning of the second stage. Located in various sites outside the village are 16 flags. They are located in a 50-mile radius from the village, in any direction. To pass this stage, you must return to the village gates with a flag. You have a time limit of 3 days. It must be 1 flag per person. If a team returns with 1 flag, only 1 person may pass. Only 16? Kazuya whispered to him. There's gotta be at least 50 of us. 54, Naruto whispered back. Fuck. Naruto couldn't help but agree. 3 days. Hana hissed. That's nothing. We're not going to have time to sleep or anything. This exam is weird as fuck. Kazuya narrowed his eyes. First exam is to open a box. Second exam is to find a flag in the middle of a massive area in less than 3 days. It's like 2 extremes. Simple then impossible. It's not like we have a choice, Naruto muttered back. We just have to do it. Ine waved a hand towards the papers. Before this stage begins, you must sign a waiver which exempts Kumo from any and all responsibility in regards to your welfare in this exam. Once signed, hand them to Maiko at the desk. Silence followed his words before an Iwanin hesitantly raised a hand. His teammate quickly grabbed it and slammed it back down. Kazuya immediately snatched Naruto's hands before he could do the same. He shot his friend a dirty look. What was wrong with asking questions? The proctor let out a heavy sigh. It's not our problem if you get maimed or killed. Now sign them or leave. Why didn't he just say that? Naruto mumbled under his breath as he yanked his hands back from Kazuya. Hana rolled her eyes and stepped forward to grab their papers, dogs following at her heels. Chapter 15. Capture the Flag. The late afternoon sun shone over them as Naruto and his team ran northwest of Kumo. They'd been running since the second stage began that morning, and Naruto still had no idea how they were supposed to find 16 measly flags in the middle of Lightning Country. He had sensed at least 3 Kumo teams running in the same direction at the start, but they were too far away to feel for the moment. Probably waiting to jump them at the worst time. Couldn't make this hellish exam any easier for them after all. Akachan, anyone around? Nah, we're good, he replied, stopping beside Hana. Kazuya turned to them. Okay, so although we pass as individuals, we're gonna pass as a team too, right? Naruto rolled his eyes and lightly punched him in the arm. Duh, Pinku Baka. We pass as a team or not at all. So this means we need to find 3 flags, Hana chimed in, frowning. What are the chances of finding 3 in one direction? Pretty much 0, Kazuya shrugged. We might get 1, but the others could all be south or east or something. Okay, so we find 1, Naruto nodded. How do we get the other 2? They said that we have to hand in a flag to pass, right? Not that it had to be a flag we found, just that we had to physically hand in a flag. Naruto considered Kazuya's words. We could have had a better chance of finding flags if we split up, Hana pointed out. Yeah, but also greater chance of being ambushed. Kazuya frowned. Everyone is gunning for us. We're the only Konoha team and the youngest. We've pretty much got a bounty on our heads. We're gonna get ambushed anyway, Naruto spoke up. We might as well use it against them. I'm with Akachan. We find a flag in the first day and then go back to Kumo. We ambush anyone who approaches the village outskirts for their flags. Then we hand them in together. Naruto nodded along to Kazuya's plan, pulling a scroll from his pocket and checking the label before summoning 3 water bottles and handing them to his teammates, keeping one for himself. So we still need to find a flag. Naruto swallowed the cool liquid and stored the bottle away, retying his hair back. The search continued. Naruto groaned as he hit a branch out of his way. The light was dying and there was still no sign of a flag anywhere. He could feel Hana and her dogs scouting just in front and Kazuya not far behind him. He coughed harshly to clear his throat. The air was definitely thinner here than it was back home. Fucking finally! He broke through the foliage and spotted Hana in the middle of a clearing, grinning as she stared up the face of a cliff. He followed her gaze until he saw the flash of red against the expanse of gray. We got one? Kazuya came up behind them and covered his eyes to look up. Looks like it. Hana nodded. Thank fuck. Kazuya slumped his shoulder, dropping his hand. I know we said we would spend the first day finding a flag, but I didn't mean the whole first day. This is literally the edge of the 50-mile perimeter they set us. It's going to take us all night to get back to Kumo to set up an ambush for tomorrow, Hana groaned, her grin falling at the thought. Yup, sighed Kazuya. Seriously, who planned this exam? They did not think it through. We found one. Naruto patted his teammate's shoulders. Let's take a moment to be happy about that before we get grumpy again. He paused. I will say that we are not wasting tomorrow looking around like today. Oh yeah, Kazuya laughed. No way are we spending 2 more days hiking around pointlessly like this. Camp out outside Kumo, target whoever comes near us, get their flags, and get back to the village. I second that, Hana chimed in. Naruto tore his gaze away and turned as chakra signatures came bursting into range. We got incoming. Shit, okay Naruto, go up and get that flag. Hana and I will hold them off. There is no way we are giving up that flag. Naruto took off running. He applied chakra to his feet and darted up the cliff face, the signatures reaching the edge of the bushes. He didn't dare look back as the ring of kunai reached him. One enemy broke off and began to follow him up the cliff. Out of the corner of his eye, a Kumo nin appeared with a sharp smirk. Naruto rolled to the side as shuriken clanged off of where he had just been. The Kumo nin appeared beside him, and Naruto ducked under his fist, jabbing his own into the man's gut. A fist came down on his back and a cough escaped his lungs. He allowed the punch to drive him to the rock face, and he rolled backwards, kicking his feet up into the Kumo nin's face as he rolled. He felt his foot connect, and as he hauled himself upright, he watched the Kumo nin bare his bloody teeth at him. The man growled and a kunai popped into his hand. You are not making it out of this exam alive, child. You're pretty old to be taking this exam, Naruto sneered back. You must suck if you're taking it at the same time as me. The man launched a barrage of kunai, and Naruto ducked and weaved, throwing a mental thanks to Genma-sensei for those many paint-covered mornings spent dodging. The man appeared in front of him, and Naruto jumped back, as pain lanced up his right arm, a slash through the sleeve. He formed a one-handed bird seal as blood ran down between his fingers. Futon Daitopa! He blew the chakra-infused air at the other shinobi. The man sunk his feet into the cliff's surface to stop himself from being blown off, but this opened up an opportunity for Naruto. He closed his mouth and darted forward, throwing a kunai up the cliff before slamming a kick into the side of the man's head. As the man pulled out another kunai to stab him in the gut, slower than earlier through his daze, Naruto had already finished his hand seals. Kawarimi no Jutsu. He appeared directly above the other shinobi, as the kunai he threw earlier clanged against the man's own. Naruto let gravity take him, and he landed with 2 feet in the middle of the man's chest. The Kumo nin's feet cracked out of the cliff face, and Naruto slapped his right hand against the cliff to catch himself. He watched the man fall. It wasn't that far since they had only made it about a quarter of the way up the cliff. He shook it off, as he felt the man's chakra flicker when he hit the ground, and continued climbing. He finally reached the red flag halfway up the cliff and stored it in one of his pocket seals. He paused, taking a moment to breathe. Maybe he shouldn't have used a futon jutsu, considering. He shook the thought from his head and rushed back down to find his teammates brushing themselves off in the middle of the decimated clearing. Naruto recognized the cause of the massive holes in both the ground and the cliff face as Hana's clan techniques, and the bushes were still burning from whatever katon jutsu Kazuya had thrown around. A groan reached him, and Naruto went to drag the unconscious Kumonin he had kicked off the cliff to be tied up with the others. Kazuya came over and whistled as he took in the damage. "What'd he ever do to you, Akachan?" Naruto rolled his eyes and dropped the man next to his teammates. Comparing the three, his did look the most injured. He could probably convince Kazuya to patch up that gash on his head and push the bone back in his leg before he tied him up. Whatever was under the blood covering his feet would most likely be fine. He started it. "Yeah, okay." Kazuya threw him a dubious look before kneeling to apply first aid. "I can do enough that he won't die. No point in killing our competitors if we don't have to." Hana jogged over. "Did you get it?" Naruto unsealed the flag and waved it around with a grin before sealing it back into his pocket. "Okay, I declare that they won't die." Kazuya rose to his feet. "I've also searched them and tied them up so they won't be hunting us down for revenge anytime soon. They don't have a flag. Now let's see that arm." Naruto looked down at the slumped older team as Kazuya passed his glowing green hand over the cut. The man he had fought probably had about on a decade on him. What would it feel like to lose to someone half his age? In Konoha, he found it hard to connect to other Genin teams. He barely knew anyone from the academy, and that didn't change after graduation. He was so busy with training and raising Ryo, he just couldn't connect to kids considering he didn't feel like one himself. It was like his body didn't match his mental age. He felt this rift now. He probably would never be able to understand this Kumonin. He and his team were different and would always be from the general Shinobi populace. Naruto looked up. "They'll be fine," Kazuya smiled. "We, however, have got to go all the way back to Kumo tonight. We also need to plan out our first ambush, while avoiding all the teams that are potentially hiding in wait to do the exact same thing to us." We barely slept getting here. Hana sat and put her head on her knees. "We hardly slept last night, and now we're not going to sleep for at least the next 2 days." "We have plenty soldier pills," Naruto offered weakly. Hana answered him with a dead-eyed stare. "We knew it would be tough," Kazuya sighed, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, I know." Hana shook her head and stood. "Sorry, I'm just tired." "We're right there with you," Kazuya offered a fist bump, which Hana gently bumped back. "We've been on worse missions," Naruto grinned, shoving his fist to join the others. "Remember the land of rivers?" A collective shudder ran through the Genin at his words. "This has nothing on the land of rivers," Kazuya shivered. A groan reached them from the tied-up Kumonins, and Hana reached over to punch the stirring Shinobi back out. "We should head out," she smiled at her team. "We need put out those fires first, though." Naruto sighed and nodded at Hana's words, heading over to deal with them. "This exam is rigged." "Of course it's rigged. 16 flags in such a huge area. The Kumonin probably got maps or were told before the exams where they would be or something. We'll need to set up our traps pretty soon. The exam ends tomorrow." "We got to find the little Konoha team too." "Easy pickings. Did you see them in the first stage? The redhead doesn't even come up to my elbow." "They're not going to have a flag, though." "Yeah, but whoever takes them out is going to have bragging rights going into the third stage. Iwa alone is foaming at the mouth to kill them off." "Huh? Good point. Are you sure you heard something?" "Yeah, it was an animal or something, but it will still make a good dinner tonight." The Kusa team entered a clearing only 10 miles outside of Kumo. The second day's afternoon sun reflecting off their cone straw hats. Black turtlenecks under beige coats, tied together with thick purple rope around their waists. The trio laughed over the last comment. They failed to notice the ring of seals that surrounded them. There was a moment of silence before a torrent of water hit the Kusa team straight on. They barely had a moment to cough and splutter the water back up before one overheard a voice from their left. "Kazuya, now!" She squinted through the water to see several points around them light up. As the seals sparked, she didn't even have time to curse as lightning hit her. 1,000 hot needles burst across her skin, and her legs gave out. She was almost grateful she lost consciousness. Naruto took a final bite of his ration bar, throwing the packaging into the open fire in front of him. No matter how many of these he ate, they never tasted any better. Wiping his hands on his trousers, he took out his hair tie and ran a hand through the red locks. It was getting pretty long now. It reached the middle of his back, but he should probably get a trim after the exams. They had settled in a rocky nook surrounded by bushes. It was safe enough for a small fire, and although they lost the advantage of higher ground, Naruto would detect anyone coming early enough that it wouldn't matter. The ambush had worked perfectly. His lightning seals had zapped everything in the zone, and Kazuya had even managed to trigger the seals himself. His homemade custom seals normally only worked for him. His one and only Sutonjutsu had made it extra effective, and he was now glad that Genma-sensei had spent that week drilling it into his brain. It may have originally been so he could put out the fires from Kazuya and Hana's katon training, but it definitely came in handy. It had even been worth losing 3 bottles worth of water. It hadn't even been the intended use for those seals. Really, they were supposed to be used individually. Slap them on an opponent, channel some chakra, and they got a nasty electric shock. It had taken a while to figure out how to stop the seal from zapping him too on activation. They had been trying to think up ambush ideas that had the least amount of enemy contact, and Fuinjutsu had been the obvious choice. He hadn't even considered using them to make essentially an electrified cage until Kazuya had suggested it. Leading the Kusa team into their trap had been even easier with him keeping track of them with his sensing abilities, and the Haimaru brothers leading them in. Kazuya clapped his hands. Okay. He grinned. So we have 2 flags now, so we're right on track. To point out the obvious, tomorrow is going to be a bloodbath. Hana fed bits of jerky to the Haimaru brothers, their canine faces looking very pleased with themselves. That Kusa team had the same idea we did. Every other team is going to be back here tomorrow. We can probably count on inter-team fighting by tomorrow, though, Kazuya nodded. Since we pass by individual, not by team, there's sure to be some that break down. So we get a flag as quickly as possible, then hightail it for the gate. Pretty much, Kazuya shrugged. We might not have the same chance as we did today for setup. We have no idea how many teams are left. So fast ambush, minimal preparation. Naruto stretched his arms out. Means we can keep moving quickly. If possible, we can try and prioritize either single competitors or those running for the gate. With the first, we outnumber them, so minimal risk, and we can cut down some competition. With the second, they are the most likely to have a flag, so we can get this over with. Naruto shared a look with Hana before they both turned to stare at Kazuya. Their teammate proceeded to frown intently into the fire until he noticed the silence. What? Are you sure you aren't related to the Nara? Asked Hana, amused. It would fit, Naruto shrugged, suppressing his own smile. Kazuya rolled his eyes. Like I keep telling you, not everyone who has half a brain in Konoha is related to the Nara clan. Don't put yourself down like that, Naruto smirked. You have at least 3/4 of a brain in there. Hana's laughter joined his, as Kazuya pelted them both with twigs from their woodpile. Naruto stood and shooed the pair of them, scraping some dirt over the small fire to put it out. I'm on watch, so get some sleep, he grinned. You both need it. He loved his team. He didn't know who else could make him laugh in the middle of such a shit situation. His teammates' smiles immediately dropped. Wait, Akachan. You can't stay up. You need sleep too. More than us even, Hana added. We know you woke up early before the exam to write those seals into our pockets. That's if you even went to sleep. So you guys are able to sense enemies incoming from over 300 meters away now? We can use other skills, Hana scowled. I'll smell or hear them coming. Let's face it, Naruto sighed. I'm the most reliable warning system we have, and we'd be idiots if we didn't use me. You guys can handle the bulk of the attacks tomorrow while I hang back, but for tonight, this makes the most sense. He unsealed a bag of soldier pills from his pocket and shook them. Have some faith. One of these will keep me going until this part of the exam ends tomorrow. His teammates were obviously unhappy, but as Naruto settled himself against a rock, he knew they would have to agree with him. Kazuya may be their brains and Hana their brawn, but Naruto knew what he contributed to this team. He had learned over his genin career that his sensing and fuinjutsu were more unique than he had ever thought, never mind in combination. There was no one like him, not only in Konoha, but in any of the villages they had visited on missions. It didn't change much. He was still Ryo's big brother, still Team 7's weakest member, still the youngest genin. It did help him in times like this. There were things only he could do. He could help his team, and he would. Soon enough, he could hear the soft breathing of his teammates, and Naruto smiled softly. They were exhausted. They needed this. His eyes throbbed in time with his head, and he rested his head back against the cool stone. Just one night. One more night. Then he could sleep. Raising the bag, he stared at the soldier pills and took one out. He sealed the others back up. What he hadn't told his teammates was he had already taken one 2 days ago. He had been getting even less sleep than they thought, but he had managed to hide it well. These exams were so important, he couldn't be the one to let the team down. Yakushi-sensei had agreed not to tell Genma-sensei purely on the basis that it looked like it was just a cold. It had started up last week, just a cough, a few sneezes, a headache or two. Nothing major, definitely not worth canceling these exams over. Everyone got colds, and while yes, he was very tired and his breathing was not where it should be, he was keeping up. They were so close to the end of the second stage. He popped the bitter pill into his mouth and brought out a water bottle to wash it down. He knew that no one was really supposed to take 2 within a 3-day period, but at the end of 3 days, he would crash. That was tomorrow. He couldn't afford to crash in the middle of tomorrow. This one would keep him going just a bit longer. The quiet night wore on as Naruto stared up at the stars, wide awake as the pill kicked in. It couldn't have been far from daybreak when he felt them. Kazuya, Hana, wake up! He shook their shoulders gently. The older genin groaned and stirred. Naruto shook them harder. We have 2 incoming from the south, 200 meters. Hana's eyes snapped open and she sprang up. Kazuya was slower to rise, but Naruto could see a plan forming in his tired pink eyes. 2? 2. Okay, Hana, hide. Naruto and I will go back to looking like we're asleep. They're moving slowly? Yeah. Naruto cocked his head to the side. I think they're going for stealth. Probably would work with any other team. Hana, your clan techniques. The moment they come into view, can you unleash your Gatsuga? Bit of an overkill, Kazuya. Naruto raised an eyebrow at his friend. No, he's right, said Hana thoughtfully. Hit them both at the same time. It's over before it's even started. You don't have to do a thing, which at this stage is a bonus. Naruto joined Kazuya on the ground and took up a sleeping position. It was at the opposite point of where the enemy would emerge from, so they should avoid being hit by Hana. Naruto closed his eyes and tried to feel out the chakra. It wasn't Kumo or Kusa, it was more earthy? Soil? It was the same taste in his mouth as when he did all those gardening D-ranks. So Konoha was around here? Apparently. It's worth checking out on our way back to the gate. Whispers reached him, and he rolled his eyes behind his closed lids. How bad did the genin in this exam think they were? They were the youngest, but still. Bushes rustled gently. Gatsuga! 2 short screams were cut out abruptly with wet crunches and dull thuds. Naruto opened his eyes and sat up. Hana and her dogs were stood over the mangled bodies of the genin, and her blood-covered face was in a deep scowl. She tossed over a headband. Naruto looked down and the pieces clicked. Kazuya peered over his shoulder. Iwa. Well, we knew they were after us. Hey guys. The boy looked up to see the scowl gone and a bright grin in its place. Hana twirled the pair of flags between her fingers. Looks like we don't have to ambush anyone tomorrow after all. Naruto's own face broke out into a grin as he leapt up and glomped Hana into a hug, ignoring the blood and flesh stuck to her clothing. Kazuya soon joined them. How idiotic do you have to be to have the flag and then seek for revenge for a war we didn't even fight in, instead of just passing the exam? Kazuya huffed into the hug quietly. Who the fuck cares? Naruto shrugged. Let's go pass this exam. What should we do with the extra? Hana held it up. Kazuya took it from her and dumped it on the ground, letting off a small keitan jutsu. They watched the flag burn before Naruto looked at his friend. They never said we couldn't destroy them, he simply said. Plus, this is one less competitor to fight in the next round. Let's go. Naruto punched his fist into the air. They made it to Kumo's village gate, just as the light from the rising sun of third day reached them. Ine stared down at them grimly, as they each handed in their flag. Kazuya's was still a little wet, and both Hana and her flag were covered in blood, but there was nothing in the rules about the condition of the flag either. Kumo really wasn't big on rules, it was turning out. They were escorted to the competitors' waiting room, where they could see that 3 Kumo nin had already beaten them there. The girl with a biju was there. She looked pristine, like she hadn't even left the village. It was a long day of waiting for the other competitors to arrive. The rain thundered against the large window as Ryo stared at the gray clouds overhead. There was probably no chance of them getting back out to the park with it like this. He slumped back against his chair as Kiba complained beside him. Man, this sucks. It wasn't supposed to last this long. Such a drag. Ryo looked across the kitchen table to Shikamaru, who was lazily staring out the window. Choji was munching on his snacks in the chair next to him contently, eyes roaming the apartment casually. Here was closest, and I don't have any umbrellas. Ryo shrugged hopelessly. It's cool, Ryo, Choji smiled. Thanks for letting us stay here until the rain stops. Kiba's head snapped to the door, and Ryo could soon heard footsteps. Keys were inserted into the door, and it flew open with a loud bang and a violent swear. Of course it had to be raining the day we came back. Calm down, Kazuya. We're home. We can have real food, a real bath, a bed. We are passing these Chunin exams because I swear we are not doing this again. How many times have I said this? We have had worse missions. And yet, those missions have been much less stressful. Ryo's brothers stomped their way into the flat, dripping with mud and misery. They dumped their sandals, bags and jackets at the door, but they still looked like they had been dragged through every wet bush in Fire Country. They were dressed in mission gear, all black with body armor and bracers. Kazuni had had a haircut before the exams, so his brown hair hung just above his eyebrows, while Ni-san had his in a low bun today. They didn't look injured, just tired. Welcome home. Mi-san looked over at him, and a warm smile immediately took over his features. Hi, sunshine, he greeted. I'd hug you, but you look clean, and I don't want to change that. Hey, Ryo. Kazuni cheerfully waved from behind Mi-san. Hey, Kiba, go get some towels. Ryo shoved his best friend out of his chair and went to boil the kettle. His friend quickly returned grumbling with 2 large towels and handed them to the 2 older boys. Mi-san thanked the Inuzuka and plonked himself on top of the towel in the middle of the floor, Kazuya following suit. Ryo dumped tea leaves into 2 cups and poured the water, handing the hot cups to his brothers. Mi-san and Kazumi thanked him warmly, and Ryo bounced back to his seat. He finally noticed Shikamaru and Choji eyeing his family awkwardly. Oh, Shikamaru, Choji, this is Mi-san and Kazumi. Mi-san, Kazumi, this is Shikamaru and Choji. He heard Kiba snickering beside him, and frowned as Kazumi sighed softly. I'm Kazuya, and this is Naruto, he said, looking pointedly over at Ryo. Previous talks about introducing people ran through his head, and his mistake became apparent. The Nara and Akimichi we've heard about? Ni-san spoke up, sipping his tea. Ryo nodded. We were at the park and the rain started. Here was closest. Ni-san nodded and took another sip. It's nice to finally meet both of you. I'm glad that Ryo's making more friends, he smiled, and Ryo felt his cheeks grow warm in a mix of affection and embarrassment. You're taking the Chunin exams? Choji piped up curiously. Just back from Kumo, Kazumi grinned widely. Wait, does that mean you passed? Kiba prompted before Ryo could ask. Not yet, Kazumi shrugged. There are 3 stages to the exams and we passed 2. We got told that the 3rd stage is going to be in a month. We came back to train here though. With all the traveling, we're only going to be training for about 3 weeks. Why a month? Kazumi turned to look at Choji. It's going to be a big tournament, so they want to give people time to arrange travel to go, like Kage and Daimyo and other important people. We were also meant to have 16 people in the tournament, but ended up with 12. Why? Kiba asked eagerly. The 2nd stage involved getting a flag to pass. 3 flags were destroyed and 1 genin pulled out due to injuries. How old are you? Shikamaru finally spoke up. The Nara had been quietly watching the exchange. That in itself wasn't unusual for the lazy boy, but that keen glint in his eye as he watched was. Speaking of quiet, Nissan was being strangely silent too, especially from meeting his new friends. His brother slowly sipped at his tea. Ryo narrowed his eyes. Was he swaying? I'm 12 and Akachan here is 10? Kazumi answered with a raised eyebrow. The way Ryo spoke about you, said Shikamaru. I thought you were way older. Me too, Choji timidly added. As all eyes moved to him, Ryo looked away from Nissan. I didn't say anything to make them think that. I just talked about you like normal. I didn't hear anything weird, Kiba nodded beside him. It's just that he said that you were raising him. Shikamaru looked between him and his brother in confusion. That you always had, and that you'd been Jin in a while. I just pictured someone older. Kazumi laughed and nudged Nissan. Nissan didn't even look at him, and alarm bells started to ring in Ryo's head. Something was wrong. Nissan's cup clattered to the ground and the barely drunk tea splashed across the wooden floor. Nissan! Kazumi was immediately hunched over him, hands glowing green. Ryo hovered over his shoulder, tears blurring his vision before he roughly wiped them away. Kazumi leaned back after a moment. He's okay, he smiled gently at Ryo and his friends. It's just exhaustion. We've been traveling and fighting almost constantly since we left 2 weeks ago. He feels safe here, so his body just decided that he needs to sleep. Ryo's heartbeat began to slow as the adrenaline left his system. Kazumi knew what he was talking about. If he said it was fine, then it was fine. His oldest brother gathered up Nissan in his arms. I'm going to take him for a checkup just in case. You stay and hang out with your friends. I promise he'll be back to embarrass you in front of your new friends by tomorrow. Kazumi grinned and Ryo offered a weak one in return at his attempt at humor. He headed to the door and Ryo watched him go. He turned back to the kitchen table and shrugged hopelessly at his friends. He'll be fine, Ryo, said Kiba. I've heard the Chunin exams are really hard. Naruto ni is a badass, but even he might have found them hard. Plus he's just super tired, Choji pointed out. My clan get it a lot. Some sleep, and he'll be fine. He's got the final Chunin exams to sit in a month. No way he'd miss that. His friend's words helped a little. As Ryo went to grab the mop from the cleaning cupboard, he missed Shikamaru's sharp gaze still fixed on the door. Kazuya burned a hole in the waiting room of the hospital. Genma-sensei was slumped in the chair next to him. He hadn't lied to Ryo when he said it was exhaustion. It also hadn't been the full story. How didn't he notice? Sure, he was tired, but he still should have been able to tell. He looked up from the floor as a grim Yakushi-sensei came out. Follow me? Kazuya exchanged a distressed look with his sensei before they scrambled to follow the doctor. They came to Naruto's hospital room, and he looked as small and swallowed up by the harsh white sheets as he had 4 years ago. Naruto came to me a week before you left for the Chunin exams with a cold. Yakushi-sensei turned to them. It seemed like any other cold, a mild cough, headaches, fatigue. Why didn't you tell me? Genma-sensei demanded. It was a cold. Everyone gets colds and usually they pass quickly with no issues. What happened? Kazuya asked with dread pooling in his gut. He'll be fine. It's mainly exhaustion and the fact he took too many soldier pills. It caused him to crash harder than usual, but he can sleep it off. He took too many soldier pills? Kazuya's mind flashed back to the night Naruto insisted he stay up to keep watch. It happens, especially among genin, Yakushi-sensei shrugged. He overworked himself. So why are we having this conversation? Why tell us about the cold? The doctor sighed heavily. Due to Naruto's condition, we knew that there would be deterioration. But that's not supposed to happen for years, Kazuya jumped in. Yes, for his organs, but we did not take into consideration his immune system. Kazuya's mind flashed back through the medical textbooks he'd read, and it clicked into place. As he let out a quiet "oh," Genma-sensei spoke up. For those which know medical knowledge, what does that mean? A simple cold for you might not be a simple cold for Naruto, Yakushi-sensei explained. The symptoms will be exaggerated and his recovery time extended. Same with the flu or any stomach bugs. Kazuya followed his gaze to his best friend. Really, I'm amazed he made it through the exams with this level of exhaustion combined with the fatigue from the cold. He's a stubborn bastard, Kazuya said quietly. That he is. smiled Yakushi-sensei. This cold was hard on him for both his energy and breathing. He had some time to recover before leaving for Kumo, but it's apparent that it was not long enough. This is more than manageable, the doctor continued. It's actually a very common side effect from most chronic conditions. I just wanted to let you know for the future, since I know he won't tell you himself. Is there a way to make it easier on him? The doctor considered Kazuya's words. As long as he has a good diet and doesn't overwork himself like this again, he should be okay. There's no way to stop him catching these things entirely, but it'll make it easier for his body to fight it off. I'd maybe add more oranges or grapefruit to his diet to increase his vitamin C intake. Kazuya made a mental note to shove an orange down his friend's throat each morning. Should I pull him from the exams? Genma-sensei asked grimly. That won't be necessary. Yakushi-sensei shook his head. He can even go home tomorrow. I can give you a list of stuff that can help him recover, but he's banned from training for a week. Kazuya could already hear Naruto's protests over that order. Thanks, Yakushi-sensei. He smiled tiredly. I'll make sure he keeps to it. Yakushi-sensei patted Kazuya's shoulder. He's lucky to have you. He left the room and Kazuya was left to listen to the steady beeping of his teammate's heart with his sensei. Thank you for watching part 3 of What If Naruto Parents Died and Naruto Becomes Shinobi to Protect His Brother. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Anime T23 for more exciting what-if scenarios and anime content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next episode.